Chapter 1. Abigail Winthrop laid in her bed, staring up at the ceiling. It was the middle of the night, but she could not sleep. Her room was sweltering, and sweat dripped savagely from her brow. But this was not the reason for her restlessness. Abigail had too many thoughts running around in her mind. Thoughts of the world, thoughts of the environment, and worries about the longevity of the human race. Earlier that night, Abigail had witnessed a television broadcast by the president addressing the public. The president solemnly informed the nation that within the past week, temperatures had reached an all-time high. Brush fires had been erupting all over the world. People were dropping from heat stroke, and as a people, they must unify to battle against global climate change immediately. Abigail watched in shock. Although she could feel the sudden change in temperature, she was unaware that it was as widespread as she had just learned. Abigail was considered to be one of the leading researchers on the global climate change issue, and she had been researching the subject for well over 10 years. Abigail was up to date on all the happenings, up to 1 week ago, when she had to take off work when she came down with the flu. What shocked her about the broadcast was the spontaneity of the change. She knew the temperature change was gradual, but recently the temperatures shot up by 13 degrees Fahrenheit from 1 week earlier, and 21 degrees Fahrenheit from the previous year's April average. These numbers were unheard of, and this was the cause for Abigail losing sleep. Abigail knew that a sudden spike in temperature was means for concern, and not just because of fires and fainting, but for what truly caused it, a cause that Abigail was not sure of, but she knew it was well worth worrying about. Now hours into the night, and Abigail knew she would have to return to work tomorrow, whether or not she was feeling over her ailments. Abigail needed to go to work. She needed to sink her brain into the dramatic climate change. This was her life's work, and this snuck up on her. Only a few hours until work, and still no sleep. Abigail tried to free her mind by staring up at the ceiling fan, which rotated slowly above her. She focused on a single blade as it cut through the air silently. Abigail could not help but wonder how effective the fan would be if the temperatures kept rising, only distributing warm air around the room. She squinted her eyes harshly at the thought, reprimanding herself for derailing back onto the train of thought of the news. "You can do this," Abigail said in a soft-spoken, gentle voice. "Just a few hours of sleep so that you're not useless tomorrow." Abigail took a few deep breaths and was able to calm herself down to rest her eyes. Her head fell onto her pillow, and she obtained some much-needed rest. But next thing she knew, her alarm was blaring. Abigail groggily arose from her nighttime tormenting grounds and entered the shower. The warm water refreshed Abigail, and for a moment, she was worry-free. She thanked the shower for its relaxing powers and jokingly contemplated spending the night under the running waters. The thought brought a smirk to her face, but it soon faded as she returned to reality. Abigail finished up her morning bathroom routines and opted to skip her makeup applications, claiming to herself that makeup could not save her today. The giant dark bags under her eyes, combined with the overall drooping of her skin from the illness, was more than a challenge to cover up. A challenge Abigail was unwilling to overcome. Plus, she never worried too much about her appearance. Abigail rummaged through her pantry for something to eat for breakfast and settled on a granola bar. She knew that she needed the energy, so she wanted to eat, but she had not yet fully regained her appetite. Abigail grabbed her keys and backpack and blew her fish a goodbye kiss. She exited her apartment, locked it, and then double-checked the doorknob to ensure that it was indeed fully fastened. She made her way to the parking garage, where she unlocked her bicycle and boarded it. Abigail started her ride to work, a ride that was just over 2 miles, which she justified as not necessary to drive her car. Abigail was a strong believer in conservation of energy practices. As Abigail pedaled, she could feel the back of her shirt dampening and rubbing against her, and she regretted not throwing an extra change of clothes into her bag. The sun was not even up yet, and it was only April. The heat was almost unbearable to be out in, let alone cycling in. Abigail took a brief rest at the halfway point, under the shade of some old-aged oak trees. In her time of rest, she reviewed some research papers that she pulled from her bag. During her week absence from work, she spent much of her time reading old papers that were published on climate change. and planned on incorporating and comparing some of the more archaic methods into her research in order to test some of her hypotheses. From her research, Abigail had predicted a sharp increase in the temperatures, but never predicted that it would appear so soon and in such extreme conditions. Feeling up to continuing her journey to work, Abigail packed up her papers and went on her way. She pulled into her bicycle parking stand, a stand that she had a tough time convincing the Wellington Research Institute to install as a way to encourage employees to reduce emissions by riding bikes. She then entered the automatic sliding doors of the institute and was met by the cold breeze of air. Since it was Monday morning, Abigail shook her head at the thought that the air conditioning was left on all weekend to cool the undoubtedly empty building. Abigail walked through the facilities, making her way to her personal area. Along the way, she passed one of her colleagues, Jake Swanson, a tall, thin, clean-shaven man who looked like he was as close to age as Abigail, both appearing to be in their mid-30s. As the two passed, they exchanged typical workplace formalities before jumping into personal dialogue. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, seeming sincerely concerned. "Better physically, but distraught over the news." Abigail wasted no time directing the conversation. "I know. I got in early this morning and already started collating the data over last week's gauges," Jake noted. "I should have the reports to you by mid-afternoon." "Thanks. That will be very useful. I need to look at everything I can. Try to take it a little easy today. We do not want you getting yourself sick again. No offense. You look horrible today." Abigail shot Jake a look at the comment, but followed it with a smirk. Abigail knew what she looked like today, but also knew that others commonly found her attractive. An attribute of hers she felt had gone to waste, since she was dedicated to her work, and found no time for a personal life other than her two fish, Christian and Doppler. "Has Todd gotten in yet?" Jake shook his head no, and went on his way. Abigail then continued on her way to her office, which she shared with Todd Peters, her research partner. Abigail opened the door and was delighted to see that Todd had cleaned the office, a gesture that meant a great deal to Abigail, since the two of them usually bickered about the clutter in their shared workspace. Abigail placed her bag down and began to unload her papers so that she can get right to work when she heard a familiar gruff voice from the doorway.
"Hello, Miss Winthrop. I wasn't expecting you."
Without turning around, Abigail responded, "How did you find me?"
"Quite easily, actually. Your name is on the door."
"I've been meaning to get that removed. Perhaps I've become too complacent. What are your intentions?"
"I was thinking of a welcome-back hug."
Abigail turned around, smiling, to greet the cheery face of her research partner, Todd. Todd was only an inch or two taller than Abigail, but outweighed her by a considerable amount. His smile protruded through a thick black beard. "It is good to see you too, Todd."
"We all missed you, and were worried sick about you,"
Todd said, as he grabbed Abigail and hugged her tightly. It was clear that the two had a special bond formed by years of close quarters and long hours together. Still remaining focused on the issue at hand, Abigail cut right back into her work. "What have you heard about the recent events? Do we have any numbers yet?" Todd pulled his swivel chair, plopped down, and coasted over to his workspace.
"I started mapping temp trends, but I'm still waiting for Jake to get me the current data."
"I spoke with him earlier. He said this afternoon."
"That works well. We could run a spatial analysis and test the uniformity."
Abigail paused for a moment and thought, and then continued. "I would also like to see if hotspots are being generated, and see the correlation to elevation, proximity to coastal waters, and subsurface earth conditions." Hearing the loud discussion in the room, Nina Larcroft, a receptionist, poked her head in the door. "You two are right back at it. Good to see that you are well again, Abby. Any way to fix the heat wave we're having?" "Still too early to tell," Abigail commented. "And this is no heat wave. This is an apparent worldwide catastrophe." Nina rolled her eyes and backed up slowly from the door and walked away, muttering under her breath, "You can't make small talk with scientists." Abigail and Todd dove back into their work, brainstorming ideas and taking notes on their dry erase board. The look of focus was visible on each of their faces, and a hint of distress. Once other workers started filling up the facilities to start their weeks, Todd closed the door to try to avoid disturbing others with their loud methods of research. Todd and Abigail had grown accustomed to proxy argumentative discussion tactics, which each one tries to shoot down the other's ideas to try to agree on a tactic that was flawless. Unfortunately, Due to the nature of this abnormality and the limited amount of data on the recent surge in the heat, most of their ideas were flawed at best. Neither of the two could come up with a decent angle to attack the research and try to place their minds on what caused the heat.
So, to clarify, Todd summarized, could not be greenhouse gases because the jump was not gradual enough to imply that the sun rays were being harvested. We've also ruled out that the Earth's orbit has shifted, placing us closer to the sun, because we would have seen other anomalies other than temperature. Can we also agree that this does not have anything to do with worldwide conspiracy, where everyone turns on their hair dryers at the same time and aim it towards the sky?
Todd stared at Abigail with a deadpan look on his face. At first, Abigail questioned her partner, but she knew him too well and knew his joking manners. I think you're onto something. Perhaps we should initiate a mandatory planetary crew cut policy to halt a conspiracy. If no one has a use for a hairdryer, then the industry would run dry. No pun intended. Todd, you're a genius. The two chuckled to break the mood and give them a much-needed mental break. Also, since the morning was coming to an end, they agreed it was time for some coffee to perk them up again. The two walked together, as was their routine, to the kitchen, each armed with their mugs. Abigail's choice of mug was solid black, and she held it in front of her tightly. Todd's choice of mug, much like his personality, was more eccentric. His mug featured a battle scene between Captain America and his nemesis Red Skull. Even the manner in which Todd held his mug contrasted with Abigail. Todd held his mug loosely in his hand, swaying with it back and forth at his side with each step. The two were an unlikely pair, but they were highly regarded among professionals as two of the best at what they do. What did you do without me? Abigail asked Todd.
A whole lot of weeping, cowering under my desk. You know, the usual,
Todd joked. The two entered the kitchen to Jake, rinsing out his own world's best dad coffee mug. Good news, you two. I'm almost finished getting you your data. I should have it ready within the hour.
No need, Todd replied. We already figured out the source. Apparently, we narrowed it down to the hotness of Fabio posing shirtless for another romance novel cover. We took the initiative and contacted him and the author and negotiated that he be fully clothed until November. That should give the weather plenty of time to stabilize and give the book a publication date closer to the holiday season. Everybody wins.
Jake looked at Todd with a blank stare and slowly shook his head from side to side. He then looked at Abigail and said, Are you sure you do not want to take another day off? Todd's jokes may make you sick again. Todd faked a hearty laugh and added,
Laughter is the best medicine.
Jake, having experience with Todd's shenanigans, continued, But doesn't that mean she would actually have to laugh at your jokes? The two smiled at each other and went on with a less demeaning conversation. When all was done, each left with hot coffee to keep them going and much-needed mental break from their work. Abigail and Todd went their way back to their office and continued with some rough preliminary calculations before they received Jake's work, which was delivered via email. The two hungrily devoured the data on their screens, their eyes darting back and forth from page to page of temperatures over the entire world. After hours had passed, the two had generated over 100 unique graphs, which were plastered on all the open wall space they formerly had. They studied the graphs to the finest detail and scribed their findings onto a world map, which they had begun to color code. Abigail straightened her back from the hunched-over position she had spent most of her afternoon in and announced, It looks like my inclination was correct. There do appear to be hotspots across the world, but oddly enough, they are not the warmest climate. The range from Hawaii to Alaska to Chile to Italy to China to Russia to Djibouti. I am not seeing any patterns of these hotspots.
Well, hotspots do appear to act as emanating sources. Temperatures decrease as distance increases. Perhaps we could run some partial differential heat equations and see the power of each.
I think there's a lot of value in that. Should I put on another pot of... Abigail was interrupted by an announcement, which played intermittent with static from the speaker in the corner of the office. Attention all employees, the voice, which they recognize as the president of the facilities. We have just been informed that there is efforts to conserve power in this time of extreme temperatures. All non-essential workplaces must power down after normal business hours. I apologize for the inconvenience, but you all must vacate the building at 5 p.m. and will not be permitted back into the building until 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Once again, I apologize. Abigail and Todd stared at each other in frustration and then glanced over at the clock, which blinked 4:36. Great. How are we supposed to get any work done? Abigail threw up her hands in the air.
Well, I'm gonna take some of this home, and I can run the equations from my sofa.
I will do the same. I will take the northern hemisphere, you take the southern. I know how much you love the Latin American culture.
Abigail, you're too good to me.
The two went through their work and separated off into who was taking what. And just as they finished, the lights went dim.
5 minutes until lights out,
a voice announced. Abigail and Todd went on their way. Todd to his car, knowing better than offer Abigail a ride home, which she would refuse, and Abigail to her bike. The frustration Abigail was feeling about cutting her work short was useful in that it supplied her in the energy she needed for the entire ride home without stopping for a break. As she rode, all she could think about was how her work was not deemed essential. Without her research, they were one step behind finding a viable solution. She shook her head in disappointment, and she pulled into her garage. Abigail locked up her vehicle and headed up to her apartment. She entered with a less than enthusiastic greeting to her fish and fed them promptly. She quickly prepared herself a meal. Since she had skipped lunch, she was starving. This was common for her, as she usually lost track of time and neglected her body demanding sustenance. She sat down in her softly lit apartment with a large spinach salad. She turned on her television so that she could watch the news. The reporter on the television was reporting on the temperature rise, as Abigail had suspected.
That is correct. The temperatures have increased, even more so today. We are looking at some sort of record-breaking heat. Top scientists around the country have been gathering at locations to identify what could be the cause of this phenomenon. We also have reports of devastating floods being reported all over the world. We have been asked to issue a warning to all of those who live around low-lying areas and flood zones to consider staying someplace higher until the heat subsides. What? What is that? This is astonishing. I've just been told that the heat is now causing brownouts worldwide. Please try to conserve your electricity and...
Abigail sat staring at a blank television set in a dark apartment. As if on cue, her electricity went out, further ruining her plans of getting work done. Abigail fumbled around in the dark until she uncovered a box of scented candles she had packed away. She then started a search for matches, which she had recently seen, but could not remember where. After a few minutes of groping through some boxes, she remembered that she saw the matches underneath the kitchen sink. She could not figure out why they were there, but she did not care, as long as she had them now. She sparked one and lit all 3 of the candles. Lavender, pumpkin, and apple. An interesting combination. She placed the candles around her apartment for maximum lighting potential. As she walked back through her apartment to attempt to work in the faint glow of lavender, she could not help but notice the heat. She did not notice earlier, but she had become drenched in sweat. She could not help but worry about others with health problems in these times. Abigail felt a burden on her shoulders to help figure out what was going on in the world so that a solution can be derived and a minimal number of people will get hurt, or even worse, die. Abigail sat down and started scratching out equations in her notebook, but after having to erase and rewrite the same equations several times because of her limited vision, she decided it was not worth her time to work at 10% of her normal speed. Abigail sat back in her couch to rest for a moment, hoping that the lights would return, but she was overtaken by fatigue. In the commotion, she did not realize she was abusing her body yet again and wearing herself out. She drifted off into slumber, only to awake hours later at the bright flash of her lights, which she had forgotten to turn off when the power went down. Huh? What time is it? Abigail questioned to herself, all discombobulated. She looked around and remembered the events of the night earlier, and was glad to see that her lights had returned. 10:15, Abigail said to her fish in an upbeat manner as she checked her watch. I still have some time to get some work done. Abigail returned to her work and started scribbling down numbers and plugging away at her calculator. She worked feverishly for an hour or so before she was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. Abigail let out a sigh before standing up to answer the phone, but still answered in a polite tone. Hello? Abigail asked. Yes, Mom, I'm all right. Yes, my power went out too. No, we are not even in the same state. It is not the same power plant, because I just know. No, I have not spoken to him, because I barely even know him, because I am not looking for a boyfriend. I have a brother, you know. If you want grandchildren, call him. He is older. Why must we have this conversation now? It is late. I have work to do. Because not many people could do what I do. This is a big deal. No, it is not just a few hot days. It is a worldwide catastrophe. No, I am not being overly dramatic. This is serious. This is a problem. I am not working alone. I have my research partner, and you know this. Yes, Todd. And no, we are not dating. Because, all right, I'm going now. I have another call. Talk to you later. Bye. Abigail hung up her phone and looked at it for a moment before rolling her eyes. She sat back down, but as soon as she looked at her notebook, the phone rang again. There is seriously something wrong with this woman. Abigail turned to her fish before picking up the phone, less politely than earlier. What is it now? Oh, I'm sorry. How are you doing? What? When? How? This can't be. Abigail fell to her knees as tears streamed down her cheeks. But I just saw him today. He was doing fine. Tomorrow? All right. Abigail's sobbing grew louder, and she sniffled back her mucus, trying to remain coherent. Thank you for calling. Abigail raised her hand, holding the phone, to place it back on the holster on the wall. She had just gotten off the phone with Nancy Peters, Todd's sister. Todd had suffered a heart attack as a result of the unair-conditioned heat, and he had passed away before the ambulance arrived. She did not know what to think. He was her best friend. She thought of how her research was going to progress, and then turned to self-blame, claiming in her mind that had she been working last week when the heat problem had begun, she might have been able to catch it early enough.
Chapter 2. Abigail stood knee-deep in a marsh. She looked down at her once white pajamas, now filthy, and stuck with mud and leaves. Where am I? She thought. She looked around, and nothing seemed familiar. A bright flash caused her to cower out of shock, and the flash was followed by the untamed chattering of wildlife. The shrieks of birds grew louder, and she covered her ears with her hands, closed her eyes tightly, and crouched further into the muck. A secondary flash occurred. Abigail was able to see it through her eyelids. She opened her eyes to see a fire had erupted around her. The fire was closing in on her, so she unclenched her fist and started running. The flames flickered their way after her, dancing along the tops of trees, leaving a trail of embers about Abigail. She ran as fast as she could until she came to a brick wall. She was surrounded by flames. There was nowhere else to go but try to go up the wall. She jumped into the wall and extended her arms as high as she could reach, but it was no use. She looked back and saw that her bare feet were being kissed by the flames, yet she felt no pain. She looked back at the top of the wall and a form appeared. The illuminating glow of the fire revealed that Todd Peters stood atop the wall. He reached out a hand to Abigail and asked her to take hold. Abigail grabbed onto Todd's hand and was pulled temporarily out of harm's way. On top of the wall, Todd embraced Abigail, pulled away, flashed her a smirk, then leaned in and whispered, "Goodbye, Miss Winthrop," into her ear. Todd then dropped himself off the wall into the flames. Abigail jumped after him, but instead of feeling a sensation of being burnt, she shot up in her bed. Breathing heavily, Abigail strained her eyes through the darkness and patted down her body as if to make sure she was in one piece. She pulled her hands away from her body, dripping with sweat. She could not decide if the moisture was a result of the humidity in the room or a result of her dream. She determined that it did not matter, since she was awake now. She took a glance at her clock, which read 4:33. She was surprised she was able to get as much sleep as she did, all things considered. Abigail turned and placed her feet onto the carpeted floor, knowing that it would be futile to attempt to fall back asleep. She performed her morning rituals and then sat down with her notebook, finally having quiet time to escape into her work, forgetting all about the woes of her life, and finally becoming complacent. She finished deriving her heat equations when an uneasy feeling overwhelmed her. Todd had taken home half of the work she had done. She knew she would be attending his wake today, but would it be inappropriate to ask Nancy for the papers? She did not want to think about it any longer. Since her notebook was getting barraged with tears, Abigail packed up her work and laid out her clothes of mourning, which she would bring to work and change before she headed to Todd's wake. Following every movement with a sigh to help fight back more tears, Abigail was finally ready to embrace the challenges of the day. She rode her bicycle in the heat, less people out on the streets than she had ever seen before. The roads were practically empty, besides the occasional car that roared by. Abigail thought it to be peculiar, but continued on her way. Abigail arrived at work and was relieved to not be the first one there. Nina greeted her with a smile that was painstakingly masking a frown, and her eye makeup was smeared, evident that she had been crying. Nina ran up to Abigail and threw her arms around her. "This place will never be the same." Abigail, not wanting to show weakness at work, decided not to share her emotions and stood there motionless, and immediately changed the topic. "Why are the streets so empty today? Didn't you hear? Riots have started everywhere." "Really? Riots? For what?" "Because people feel like they're being lied to. Protesters have marched on City Hall demanding answers. They say it was an experimental weapon gone wrong." "That is absurd. How large is this mob?" "Well, it is growing in numbers, but not everyone is with them. Some are just looters who are stealing from the closed stores. No one wants to leave their homes. It's dangerous out there." "I had no idea. If you knew the danger, how come you came to work today?" "Abby, if you saw where I lived, you would understand. I am safer on the streets than in there." "Well, I have some work to do. But if we're the only ones, I will work out here to keep you company," Abigail said with a smile as she walked to her office. Abigail did not particularly care for Nina's companionship, but knew that she would serve as a good distraction for Todd's passing. And sitting alone in the room that they shared for many years would just be torment. Abigail returned to the reception area, placed her papers down, and pulled up a seat. The two worked quietly through the morning, aside from a dull tapping of a keyboard and the occasional rustling of papers. As lunchtime approached, Nina stood to stretch her legs. She walked over to the glass doors of the building and stared outside at the desolate city. "What is happening?" Nina asked as she turned towards Abigail. Abigail raised her head from her work to look at Nina, but something outside caught her eye. It was a gray, spherical projectile making its way towards the building. "Watch out!" Abigail cried as she lunged at Nina, knocking her out of the way of a large rock that crashed through the glass doors. Covered in shards of glass, Abigail raised her head to find the source of the projectile, and to her dismay, a band of several armed men with bats and sticks headed towards the facility. Abigail should have known that when rioting begins, research facilities are usually a target since they have the potential of harboring drugs and medicines. Abigail helped Nina to her feet, cradled her papers in her arms, and pulled Nina further into the building. "Run, Nina, run!" The two ran, not knowing the intentions of the intruders, but not willing to wait to find out. They ran for the back exit of the building, but once they opened the door, a second mob was waiting there, trying to climb through a barred window. When the two women pushed the door open, a well-dressed man darted his eyes at them and reached for the door. Abigail tried to pull it shut, but it was too late. The man had already formed a barricade with his forearm. Abigail turned and pulled Nina stealthily into a bathroom and motioned to keep quiet by placing her finger over her lips. "What do we do, Abby? They're going to eventually find us in here," Abigail thought as she better organized her papers. She heard the breaking of glass and violent rummaging through the walls of the bathroom. "If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Please explain." "We wait by the door and listen for when no one is right outside, and we slip out of the bathroom and start breaking stuff. Others will think we're just all part of the mob, and we will slowly make our way out to the street." "What about our clothes? Will they think we are with them?" "I don't think rioters have a dress code, so I think we'll be all right." Abigail and Nina followed through with the plan, slipped the door open, and slunk into the main area of the facilities. Abigail saw a few surrounding a storage locker, rocking it back and forth to try to tip it onto its side. Abigail immediately kicked a nearby desk and bent over to delve into the contents of its drawers. Nina followed by picking up a desk lamp and hurling it into a wall. No one seemed to pay any mind to the two as they crept out of the building and towards the street. Abigail tightly clutched her papers all the while. Abigail's jaw dropped at the sight of the city streets before her. Less than an hour ago, the streets were peaceful, and now, the once isolated city was now victim to mass destruction. Hundreds of angry people marched through the streets, filtering in and out of stores, carrying as many goods as they could. Complete chaos surrounded them, and even amongst the madness, Abigail knew she had to make it to Todd's wake. "I need to go to Todd's. Will you join me?" "Of course. I do not want to be alone in this mess." Unfortunately, Todd's home, where the wake was being held, was a few miles away, just outside the city limits. Recognizing it would be useless to attempt to drive Nina's car through the streets, and unable to carry the two on Abigail's bike, they had to walk. They walked in horror through the insanity of what society had degraded to, all because of the weather. They watched each rioter dripping with sweat, some dripping with blood, and many toppling over from heat stroke.
resulting in them being brutally trampled. Abigail clung to Nina so that neither would trip and meet an atrocious end. They trekked for hours, and the sun was finally beginning to set, granting them with at least the comfort of the rays not bearing down upon them. Since they were now outside the city limits, the riots had subdued, and they were able to pick up their pace. They arrived at Todd's residence and knocked on the door. Todd's sister answered, still crying over her loss. "I'm so sorry, Nancy," Abigail said as she placed a hand on Nancy's shoulder. Nina did not say a word, just showed them inside to the living room, where a dozen or so empty chairs sat. Abigail knew that the room was empty because people did not want to leave the comfort of their homes, even to mourn the loss of a great man. Abigail became visibly angry at the thought of no one paying their respect to a man that would have gone out of his way to cheer someone up or offer a helping hand. Nancy picked up on the tension in Abigail's face. "It is all right. Todd would not have wanted people to get hurt just to be here. I am all right with it. I'm sure the only one he wanted to show up is right here now. He adored you." Abigail was touched at the truth in the words, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "He was the only true friend I ever had." Nancy took a few steps back and picked up Todd's briefcase off a coffee table. "I spoke with him last night, before it happened, and he mentioned that you two had a breakthrough in what is happening. I think he would want you to finish up the work. It was his passion, and I am sure it is yours as well." Nancy extended the briefcase to Abigail, who gently grasped it. The three women sat in the living room for the remainder of the night, every now and again partaking in solemn small talk, but, for the most part, remaining silent. Abigail considered what her actions should be. She knew that Nina would prefer to stay as long as she could to avoid not only the walk back, but the dangers that may reside at her home. She also did not want to leave Nancy alone, since Todd was her only family. Abigail then considered, if Nina stayed with Nancy, then it would be all right if she left, but she was also not looking forward to the walk back to her place. "I apologize, but—" "I know," Nancy interrupted. "You have so much work to do, twice as much now. Why don't I give you a ride home? You mind if I stay the night?" Nina asked of Nancy. "This way neither of us have to be alone." Abigail admired Nina's ability to not dance around the issues and speak her mind. "I think that is a good idea, and I would love a ride home. Since I know stubbornness is hereditary, I assume both you and Todd got it from your parents. I will not try to convince you not to drive me." The three smiled and loaded into the car parked in the driveway. The radio turned on along with the car, and the station was announcing more news as it unfolded. "Official, it has now been confirmed, with satellite imagery, that coastlines are retreating. To accompany the worldwide temperature increase, the ice caps are melting quicker than ever and increasing the ocean levels at alarming rates. I have here with me Dr. Nancy turned off the radio. "I do not think we need to hear any more of that. We are all going to drown. I do not believe it," Nina said in shock. "I do not believe it either," Abigail said, much more skeptical and right-minded. "The ice caps are currently in water. They displace water just by being there, and the volumetric displacement of the ice is much greater than that of water. It does not make sense for the ocean levels to be rising drastically just based off a temperature increase. I feel like we're missing something. Well, I know how much Todd thought of you, and if anyone was smart enough to figure it out, I am putting my eggs in your basket," Nancy said with a smile. Abigail spent the remainder of the ride considering factors she had not yet considered in her research, but was not coming to any conclusions. Before she knew it, they arrived at her apartment complex, and she departed with brief farewells. Abigail returned to her home and did not waste any time. She spread Todd's and her own papers around and paced back and forth, speaking aloud to herself. Abigail worked through the night, running numbers, comparing charts and graphs, writing down ideas, and it was not until the morning dusk broke that it occurred to her. It is not the weather that is changing the earth. It is the earth that is changing the weather, Abigail announced. She hurriedly grabbed a few choice papers, threw on a fresh pair of clothes, and sprinted towards City Hall. She arrived in a panic state, adrenaline pumping from the run, but awkwardly off balance from her sleep-deprived nature. Abigail climbed the stairs to the entrance of the building, but alas, it was not open. She glanced at the clock tower, which implied that no one would be there to open up the building for another 45 minutes. She took the time as a gift to reclaim her breath and gather her thoughts. With the importance of the message, she had to be in the right frame of mind. Abigail descended the stairs in search of anywhere to get a cup of coffee, and along the way, she noticed that the protesters were once again starting to congregate.
Do not let them lie to you,
a man shouted to Abigail as she walked by. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, unkempt and unshaven, and wielding a picket sign that was currently blank.
This is a conspiracy cover-up. Weapons of mass destruction are the lies. This time, they brought the war home.
Abigail, intrigued by the obscurity of the comments, decided to invite him into a debate. She was going to use this as practice for her presentation to the city officials. What if it's not the government conspiracies, but a planet conspiracy? What if the weapons you speak of were not mechanical in nature, but nature itself? What if we have overstayed our welcome? Perhaps it's just time for us to go. The protesters stared at Abigail in confusion, and Abigail realized how absurd she sounded. She turned and walked away, glad she said those words so that she can refrain from saying them later. She found her coffee and sipped it as quickly as possible without suffering scalding injuries. Abigail disposed of her coffee cup and once again ascended upon City Hall. She was delighted to be able to open the door this try. She approached the mayor's office, a man whom she had dealt with before, and therefore knew that he would see her. Chapter 3. Abigail sat down when Mayor Gregory Jenkins offered her a seat. I apologize for not scheduling an appointment, but this could not wait. I understand, Mayor Jenkins nodded. To be quite honest, I would rather see you barge in here than any of those protesting nutjobs out front. Now, what can I do for you? I have a theory about the source of the global climate changes. Most people are assuming that the weather is what's causing the changes of the Earth. The sun heats the atmosphere, heats the Earth, melts the ice, etc. But I do not believe this to be true. I have found hot spots located around the globe, areas that are degrees higher than areas around them, with a distinct radius of temperature that drops as distance increases away from them. They are not uniformly spaced and vary in intensity of heat. What if the Earth was the primary contributor to heating up the atmosphere, and not the sun's rays? What if the hot spots are caused by inner Earth molten lava surfacing? Also, the receding coastal boundaries? This is not natural based off of rising temperatures. Perhaps the ocean bottom is shifting, also caused by subsurface activity, which could better explain ocean levels changing. Mayor Jenkins leaned back in his chair and raised his eyebrows. Miss Winthrop, you know that I respect you and hold your research in the highest regard. But if I call up Washington and tell them that the Earth is acting up, I can kiss my political career goodbye. I can see that you're tired, and I know that you want to have the answers. But the Earth has never behaved in the manner to which you explain. Why would it start now? The temperatures have also never jumped 13 degrees in 1 week before, and the ocean never started swallowing up land before. This is not simply the world getting hotter from global warming. There is something causing this change. We need to investigate these hotspots if we ever want to understand what is happening so we can reverse the effects. Can anybody vouch for this research? Has anybody verified your findings? What about your research partner? What is his name? Peter? Todd Peters. He passed away 2 days ago from the heat, but he believed in me. Taken by the news that Todd had passed. Oh, Abigail, you're grief-stricken. You're looking for answers that are not reasonable, just to find answers. You have been an asset to this city for over a decade. Do not throw your career away on this nonsense. Please, the city has suffered enough. Abigail stood and walked to the door, turning to face the mayor just before leaving to have the last word. Science is about exploring all the possibilities. Ignorance is only exploring what you want to believe is possible. Abigail exited City Hall and was met with the harsh heat as if she had just stepped into a preheated oven. All of the protesters from earlier had abandoned their post and were huddled underneath a large oak tree on the front lawn of the government center. Abigail paused and contemplated where she could resume her research. She was not going to give up her pursuit, but she knew she needed more evidence. Her office was ransacked, so she headed back to her apartment, taking the long way to capture as much shade as possible. When she arrived at home, Abigail immediately turned on the news to see if any other theories were arising, perhaps aiding in hers.
The death toll is rising, reported a news anchor. The horrific images you're about to see were taken moments ago in Rome, where an unlikely monsoon struck, killing up to 3,000 people. The monsoon struck overnight,
causing floods and swallowing homes. Abigail changed the channel. Atlanta, Georgia, where wave after wave of hurricane has left the city devastated. 830 confirmed dead. The hospitals are running out of... Abigail switched to another station. Earthquake of tremendous proportions! The Tokyo skyline is changed forever! Only having one more major news station to try, Abigail pressed her remote. Are blazing. Water supplies have run dry in Nevada, and the fire is almost statewide. Many civilians have been asked to evacuate, but road congestion has become a major issue. It has not been confirmed, but the estimates are up to 10,000 injured or dead. Abigail turned off the television and slumped into her couch. Her world was falling apart around her, and the world was falling apart around that. Abigail straightened up and had become more inspired to find the cause of the destruction. Even after Mayor Jenkins rejected her ideas, she knew she was onto something, and she must find it. Abigail studied her findings, growing more and more excited as her work all seemed to piece together. Abigail focused her studies on the most severe of the hotspots, and one stood out, being scales larger in magnitude than the others. Abigail managed to estimate the longitude and latitude of the zone and researched the coordinates on her computer. The coordinates corresponded to a mountainous region located in Pennsylvania. Abigail considered driving there after looking up directions and revealed it was only a 10-hour car ride from her apartment in Connecticut. Abigail knew she was going to go there to investigate, but wanted to make sure she was fully prepared with her research first. She browsed the internet for any information regarding the region and checked her resources of published research papers. To her surprise, there was a plethora of information of various researchers, all focused on abnormal activity. One article claimed that airplanes had mysteriously crashed in the area where no mechanical failure was evident. An environmental researcher published that multiple species of previously thought to be extinct deciduous trees had emerged in the region in vast numbers. Abigail then stumbled on an archive of newspaper articles on animal attacks in the mountains, claiming that animal-related deaths in the country are highest in a 20-mile radius from Pennsylvania State Park. Abigail looked up the coordinates of the park, and as she expected, the park was in the vicinity, a mere 15 miles of her hotspot. As Abigail continued reading, the name of one research group kept surfacing, the Researchers of the Ever-Natural Evolving World. Abigail researched the group, and they were based out of the mountain region. This had to be more than coincidental. Abigail figured they must have the answers she needed, or perhaps they had already been working on the issue involving the climate change. She had to speak with them, so she found their telephone number and dialed. Unfortunately, only an answering machine picked up, asking for her to call back during normal business hours. Abigail looked at her watch and realized the whole day had passed. Abigail stood and stretched. Reaching towards the ceiling, she took a deep breath, and moist air filled her lungs. The air moisture content was getting uncomfortable. Abigail decided to take a cold shower and head to bed early, so that she can travel to the researchers first thing in the morning, giving them a call along the way to schedule an appointment, if possible. Chapter 4. Abigail sprung out of bed, panting. The nightmares were becoming an agonizing ritual. This one did not involve Todd, but rather the world bursting into flames. In the dream, Abigail attempted to restrain the fire, but she was overpowered. She tried to blow back the flames, but her breath ran out. By the end of the dream, Abigail had watched all of her family and friends burn and was helpless against its power. Abigail abandoned the idea of returning to sleep and prepared for her journey. She packed a few essential items, mostly research aids, and some food. She grabbed the directions she printed out the night prior and went to feed Christian and Doppler. She twisted off the top of the fish food and went to sprinkle some in the bowl, but stopped. Both of her pets were belly up in a half-evaporated fishbowl. The temperature of the water must have become too much for them to handle. Abigail put down her bags and tended to her fallen friends. She poured them into her toilet and paused for a moment, reflecting on their presence before making the final flush. Abigail then returned to preparing for her departure and went on her way, making sure to lock up her apartment. Abigail headed to her car, which had not been used for some weeks. Abigail hoped that it was still in good enough condition to make the trip. The car started promptly, and Abigail was ecstatic to find that she had last left it with a full tank of gas. Her journey began. Abigail took to the streets, and since it was still early, the rioters were still tired and sleeping from a full night of busy looting. She escaped the city with ease,
and in no time found herself crossing the New York border. The sides of the highway were lined with what could have been mistaken as roadkill, but there was the chance that these animals died from heat. Abigail could not make it over a mile without seeing the carcass of a deer, a skunk, or a raccoon. It could be a traumatizing experience for any younger child, but luckily, Abigail was fully matured, and she had become numb to the idea of death. She had seen too many things die around her, with the most recent days standing the most prominent. Thinking of the animal casualties, Abigail could not help but let her mind wander to a time when she was younger, a time when she was only 7 years old. Her father, Chester Winthrop, a researcher in the fields of electromagnetic energy, a self-proclaimed king of the lab, and was more dedicated to his work than his family. Chester could tell that his daughter, Abigail, had a quick mind, a mind for science, and took pride in her. His pride was more of a self-fulfillment over a love for his daughter, more of a bragging right, but regardless, Abigail adored the attention. Chester would bring Abigail to work with him whenever Abigail had off from school. On this one day, to which Abigail was reminiscing, was one such day where parent-teacher conferences had caused her to be on her way to work with Chester. Chester loved to explain the details of his research to Abigail, hoping to pass on his legacy when she grew up. Even at the age of 7 years old, Abigail was able to comprehend the scope of her father's work. Chester had just received an expensive new machine in his lab, which he was eager to show Abigail. The machine harvested electromagnetic forces by revolving rings of magnets around one another. Chester and Abigail set up an experiment with the machine, and Abigail waited in anticipation to see what Chester referred to as the magic. The two huddled behind shatterproof safety glass before Chester threw the switch. Abigail watched in amazement as the machine spun, filling the room with a static buzz. Chester pointed to the computer screen, which recorded the power output compared to the input, and nodded approvingly. Abigail smiled from ear to ear, but then noticed an unlatched metal lock creeping its way towards the magnets. Abigail pulled on her father's sleeve and pointed at the lock. "For crying out loud," Chester expressed his anger. "Who left that out? This could ruin the machine and bankrupt the lab." Chester emerged from behind the safety glass and ran for the lock before it plummeted into the electromagnet. Just before Chester's outreach hand grabbed the lock, it took flight into the spinning blades of the magnet, and upon striking the metal, was propelled back with great velocity. The lock struck Chester, who had been bent over looking up at the magnet. The lock lodged itself in Chester's forehead, and Abigail watched as her father stumbled backwards, with maroon blood pooling around his head. Abigail quickly ran over to the lever for the magnet, a precaution to which Chester should have taken. And once the machine was turned off, she ran over to her dad. She knelt beside him and grabbed his hand in her hand. Chester blinked as Abigail pursed his lips, preparing to say what he knew were going to be the final words to his daughter. Chester coughed once before whispering the words, "I have no regrets." Chester's head then went limp as Abigail cried, with her father's lifeless hand still clutched in hers. Abigail sat and wept until the other lab technicians ran in and pried her away. The events that unfolded that day molded Abigail's life. Although she grew up to resent her father for never being around for her mother, she admired his dedication to his research. Even his final words were not about his family or anything to do with Abigail. It was his pride in what he accomplished in his field. As Abigail grew older, she inherited her father's drive and tunnel vision for research, but she was aware of her attributes and vowed never to put work before her family, which is why she never considered starting a family of her own. Abigail shook her head as if to snap herself out of her daydream, and her eyes fixed onto a sign she passed. "Welcome to Pennsylvania," the sign read. Only a few hours left. Abigail pulled over to the side of the road and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed the number of the researchers of the ever-natural evolving world, and after 3 rings, a soft-spoken man answered. Abigail introduced herself and expressed her interest in their work, and asked if she could stop by and ask them a few questions. The man obliged her request, said she could stop in any time she wanted, and they would be glad to help in any way possible. Abigail packed her phone away and merged back onto the road. To help clear her mind, Abigail turned on the radio in search of some music. Since Abigail did not have a preference to any musical style, she just kept changing the station when the music was interrupted by commercials or static. She drove for hours, the music passing the time quickly, until her directions implied that she was coming up to the location of the research center. She turned off the highway, followed by an array of lefts and rights, which led her to a fenced-off driveway. A sign on the driveway read, "Research Center ahead. Foot traffic only." Abigail pulled her car onto the shoulder of the road and pulled the key from the ignition. She grabbed her backpack, full of her work, and exited the car in the searing heat. She locked up her car and tested the handle to assure herself that it was indeed locked, and she walked through a pedestrian gap in the fence. Abigail followed a trail leading up the side of the hill through a densely wooded area to where she hoped she would find the researchers she came for. The air was intense and was causing her eyelids to become puffy, impairing her vision. She stopped for a moment to wipe her face with her shirt when she heard a rustling of foliage around her. A scrappy squirrel emerged, darting its head from side to side, while staring, as if sizing the human up. The squirrel bounded closer to Abigail, who became uneasy with the rodent's comfort around the stranger in its territory. Abigail took a step backwards and noticed 2 more squirrels that appeared behind her. All 3 of the gray creatures slowly approached, until one hissed and then charged. Each squirrel lunged itself at Abigail's face, with mouth wide open, bearing sharp incisors. Abigail was able to land a foot against one of the squirrels, driving it into a nearby tree and evading the other 2 attacks. Abigail fled the scene, running further into the trail, hoping the research institute was near. After running for a few moments, she turned around, hopeful to see no more squirrels, but instead saw that she was being chased by many creatures. More squirrels and rodents that she can count in the short time with her head turned. A full-grown buck with antlers that could easily be spanning 6 feet, an assortment of flying birds, and amongst all the other animals, an enormously proportioned brown bear. Stricken with fear, Abigail turned her run into a sprint, and hastily ran herself into low-lying branches of a tree. She was able to keep her footing, but managed to drop her bag. She left it behind, feeling her life was more important, but was immediately overcome with regrets. She needed that bag. She changed her course to circling back to where she dropped her backpack, but the deer was closing in on her, being more graceful of a runner. Abigail could hear the buck snorting behind her with each gallop it took, and then she felt a sharp dagger dig into her shoulder blade. The deer brutally jerked its head, sending Abigail flying from the antlers into the air. Abigail flew into a tree and gripped it temporarily to prevent sustaining serious injuries from the fall. She slid back to the ground and was surrounded by the woodland wildlife, their eyes fixated on her, and their teeth visible with toothy snarls. This was highly unusual behavior, and Abigail did not see immediate sanctuary. Abigail reached back to massage her shoulder wound, while the bear slowly pawed its way through the other animals. The bear poked its nose into Abigail's face and sniffed her ferociously. Abigail tried to remain as calm as she could, but she could not help her body from trembling. The bear roared into her face, causing her hair to fly wildly from the force of the bear's breath. Abigail, still with her hand over her shoulder, swung her elbow around, striking the bear in the chin. Abigail then ducked behind a tree she was standing against and continued running. The animals continued their pursuit, chasing Abigail well off the trail, into the unfamiliar forest. The chase continued until Abigail found herself, again, with nowhere else to run. The animals managed to lead her to the edge of a cliff, a hunting strategy usually employed by humans against larger game. But the tables have turned. She stood with her back against the open air, jagged cliffs below, and faced the oncoming beast. Her legs burned, and her legs were on the verge of exploding. Yet she stood tall. The squirrels, the initial instigators, scampered up to Abigail, twitching their noses, almost looking as if they were laughing at her. But they drew in too close. Abigail picked one up and tossed it over the cliff. The others backed off, while Abigail readied herself for retaliation. The buck charged, intending to ram Abigail again with his antlers, but Abigail skirted the attack with a last-minute sidestep. She jabbed her thumb into the eye socket of the deer, causing him to flail his head about violently. While the deer bucked about, the bear took a swipe at Abigail, tearing into her hindside with devastating results. Abigail could feel the blood pouring down her back, the warm sensation flooding over her body. The bear pounced on her, sending her crashing to the rocky ground face first. The bear stood atop her and roared into the air, announcing her defeat. Abigail sprawled out on the ground, bloodied and battered, knew this was not the time to give in. She must fight, or she will surely be killed. As the bear was boasting, Abigail propped herself up on her elbows and dragged herself towards the edge of the cliff. She could feel the profound weight of the bear on her back, yet she trudged ahead. The bear extended its claws into Abigail's back, resulting in her crying out in pain, while squirrels gnawed at her sides. The birds, perched on her back, began pecking. Abigail was almost in reach of the edge of the cliff. She extended her hand as far as she could reach and took hold of the ledge. With all her might, she pulled herself and the animals over the cliff with her, her adrenaline fueling the entire exchange. The birds took flight before falling with the body, but the squirrels that were latched on to her and the bear joined Abigail. With only her fingertips to counteract the plummet, Abigail clung to the ledge, while the bear plunged to the rough terrain below, meeting an untimely demise. The birds and squirrels returned to Abigail's fingers, relentlessly trying to seal her fate. Their actions were successful. Abigail lost her grip, but luckily was able to toss her body onto the protrusion of the cliff, just large enough to hold her. The beings not blessed with the ability of flight were now useless in the attack on Abigail, but the fiends of flight continued their violent assault. They soared close and dove in for quick attacks, with the intentions of knocking Abigail off balance to her doom. The beaks were sharp and sliced through her skin easily. She held up her arms to try to block the attacks, but the pain was just transferred to her extremities. She turned and faced the cliff, undertaking the task of trying to pry a rock from the cliff to brandish as a weapon, while the birds took advantage of her back and open wounds. Abigail was able to wiggle one of the stones loose, turning back around quickly and met one of the birds with the stone. The bird's beak shattered from the strike, and its body floated limply out of sight. The bombardment continued, but one by one, Abigail was able to pick off the birds of prey. Some were able to stave off one or two swings, but eventually met the same destiny as the others before them. Once the skies were clear and all was silent, Abigail looked to the ledge above her. With precise maneuvers, she knew she would be able to climb to safety, but the combination of the sun beating down upon her, her adrenaline subsiding, and her apparent blood loss, Abigail could not take on the challenge. She needed to rest. Abigail did her best to mend her wounds from ripping apart her tattered clothing and sat down. She rested her head against the cliff and closed her eyes. She did not want to get too comfortable and chance slipping off her stoop, but she did need to regain her strength if she was going to scramble up that rocky wall above her.
Chapter 5. Abigail opened her eyes, her face baking in the heat. She stretched, the dried blood that encased her body cracking and flaking off. Her body was sore and ached, but she must push on. She got to her feet and eyed up the climb ahead of her. She took hold of the lip of the rock above her and pulled herself up enough to elevate her foot. Pain circulated through her body with each movement, but she was beginning to tolerate the sting. Abigail slowly made her way up the cliff. She reached the top and peered up to see if anything was waiting for her, but it was clear. She pulled herself up and hugged the safety of solid ground. Abigail stood and gazed over the edge. Down below were the body of the bear and the other woodland wildlife lay frozen in the intense heat. Apparently, the warnings of the animal attacks from the papers were justified. Abigail walked back into the forest, remaining wary of the slightest sound. She easily found her way back to the trail by following the trampled leaves and twigs from the pursuit. But once she reached the trail, she had an important decision to tackle. Go back for the research and chance another attack, or continue on without it and reduce the time amongst the psychotic beings. She determined that her research was too important, and since her lab was ransacked, this could be the only surviving copy of her work. She backtracked into the forest, determined that she had made the right choice. Abigail crept her way along the trail, pausing with every couple of steps to keep her noise generation to a minimum. Her efforts were successful as she reached her destination. She saw her bag lying there, brushed with leaves, but unfortunately, a doe was situated in the immediate proximity. In an instant, the deer became aware of Abigail's presence and arced her back. Abigail was not about to turn back. She pushed on, taking sluggish strides closer and closer. The deer took a few steps back and then bowed her head and pushed the bag towards Abigail with her nose. Puzzled, Abigail leaned in and snatched the bag and proceeded to take steps backward. The doe stood and stomped its feet playfully before galloping off into the woods. Overjoyed to have her bag, but still uneasy about her surroundings, Abigail moved on. She could not help but think about the deer and what just happened, and considering the scenarios, was that doe just resting there? And to think anything else would be to read too much into it.
Or was the deer waiting for her? She decided not to attack and call on other animals for assistance, or perhaps the deer was protecting the bag and assuring nothing ill was to come of it. Abigail dismissed her ideas because they were not bounded by science and were nothing more than speculation with no proper test to prove anything. The remainder of Abigail's journey was delightfully uneventful. She came to a large concrete building with no drives or walkways about it, and a sign which read, "Researchers of the ever-natural, evolving world." Finally, Abigail exhaled a sigh of relief. She had made it. She approached the front door and pulled on the handle, but the door did not budge. It was locked. She pushed a button alongside the door, assuming it was a doorbell of sorts. A loud buzz sounded after a moment, and Abigail tried the door again. This time, it swung open. Abigail entered and was greeted by a bald man, wearing thick glasses and a long red and purple lab coat. "You must be Abigail Winthrop. We were beginning to think you were not going to show." Abigail found it odd that he neglected to be fazed by her bloodied appearance. "Sorry I'm late. I had a little snafu in the forest."
"Yes, well, as you can imagine, we do not get many visitors for that reason. I am Dr. Albert Benu."
Abigail extended her filthy hand to shake Dr. Benu's, but retreated when she realized how soiled it was. "My apologies. Do you have a washroom that I may use to clean up a little?"
"Of course, this way,"
Dr. Benu announced, in a monotone, mundane manner. Dr. Benu led Abigail to the lavatory and pointed out a location of the first aid equipment. Abigail made use of the first aid kit, and after cleaning up, she redressed her wounds with more sanitary articles than her torn clothing. And when she finished, she exited the room. Dr. Benu was standing just outside the door and extended a fresh pair of clothes to Abigail. Abigail graciously accepted and re-entered to change. She placed the red and purple scrubs on and thought it to be an odd color combination.
"Feeling refreshed?"
Dr. Benu asked of Abigail as she returned. "Yes, thank you very much. I love the colors."
"Yes, we wear bold colors so that when we are out in the field, we can easily spot one another."
"That makes sense."
"Now, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that you had some questions for us."
"Yes. I am a researcher, and my focus is on weather patterns of past, present, and future. As you may have already guessed, the last week has been hectic trying to figure out exactly what has been happening around the world. I have discovered that in various areas around the globe, hotspots have appeared, and I believe that these hotspots to be the cause of the changes. I have pinpointed the most severe of the hotspots to this region, and I have become aware that your research group primarily focuses on this area. I would love to sit down and review and compare our findings. I believe that if we work together, that we might be able to make huge strides in finding a solution to the current global climate issues."
"Miss Winthrop, perhaps you are a bit confused with our work here. We do study this region, and our research spans back generations, over 200 years of recorded research. But we have little to no interest on the impacts of the rest of the world. We study sustainability, and those before me have mapped out the locations to be a miniature utopia. Nature behaves differently around these mountains. Things are peaceful. Through our research, we have managed to create a thriving harmony with the environment, where we generate our own food, power, and living conditions, without a negative impact on the world around us. We have become symbiotic with nature, as opposed to the rest of the world's domineering ways. I will look through your research and compare it to our findings, but I am not certain of how much use it will be to you."
"I appreciate your help. Before we get started, you mentioned nature behaves differently here? How so?" Abigail inquired.
"Well, nature is empowered and independent, and this is because we gave power back to it. The animals strive, the plants flourish, the humans coexist."
"Has it always been like that? Why was this specific location chosen?"
"We are uncertain. There are some things that draw us towards the mountains, perhaps having something to do with the nature of being a dormant volcano."
"I was unaware that there was volcanic activity in this region. I thought the only volcanoes in the continental United States were on the west coast."
"My dear, there is volcanic activity everywhere. They are not just all publicized."
"Has anything peculiar happened recently with the volcano?" I believe the hotspots could be generated by volcanic activity, and this being a volcano lends to my theories. Let me show you my work. Abigail reached into her bag and pulled out her papers, but was stopped by Dr. Banu, who gently placed his hand on her forearm. That is not necessary, my dear, for we know that already. That is great. That means we are on the same page. With your help, I am sure we can convince the government agencies to aid us. It is not that simple, and the government will not be getting involved. Allow me to explain. Dr. Banu started as he paced back and forth. The researchers of the ever-natural evolving world have not only been granted a sustainable life in an Eden lifestyle, we were also burdened with the great responsibility of controlling the volcano. Our research of the volcano started after we were able to conclude, with high levels of confidence, that the fluctuations in the Earth's temperatures coincide with the cyclic volcano vibrations. Traditions passed down from those researchers before us, betrothed upon us with strict instructions for controlling the volcano through means that are somewhat unconventional. For over 200 years, we have been able to manage avoiding a meltdown, but recently it has begun to grow out of our control. The vibrations have become more frequent, and as you can see, effects are worldwide. Miss Winthrop, if you can help us research this volcano and help us save our Eden, we would be forever grateful.
Of course I will. Would you mind if I sit up here and make use of your facilities?
Under normal circumstances, I would graciously offer you all of my resources, but I fear it is too dangerous. If the volcano should become active once more and erupt, I would not want any harm to come of you. We have made our home here, and we are bonded with the land, so we will proudly pass on with it. But you must continue and spread your findings.
A disheartened look overcame Abigail at the thought of traveling back through the dreaded forest. I thank you for your time. Do you have any data I can take with me to review?
We recently submitted data to another research facility. I have a folder containing all the information we provided them with, and I do believe that you will find that most useful. I understand the fear in your eyes, but I ask that you do not worry. I will grant you a guide to show you through the forest. We've been living among the animals, and they do not threaten us, only outsiders. We shall keep in touch through phone conversations. I wish you the best of luck with your work, Miss Winthrop.
Dr. Banu departed momentarily and returned with a large brown folder bursting with papers, bound together with a string. A second man followed behind, with blonde hair, cropped shortly, and dressed in a familiar red and purple lab coat. Miss Winthrop, I am Dr. Felix McRae, the other man introduced. I will show you through the forest. The two left the facilities and into the woods, and even though Abigail tried to make small talk, Dr. McRae remained silent. When they reached the front gate unharmed, Dr. McRae retreated back up the trail without a word. Abigail re-entered her car and sat there for a moment, reflecting on the researchers. She thought they seemed highly unusual, even for secluded researchers. She also found it irregular how quickly Dr. Banu was to rush her out once the talk of the volcano erupted. Abigail did not want to drive back to Connecticut just yet. Perhaps she would stay in a local hotel while she perused through her recently received data. Chapter 6. Abigail sat in a diner, sipping a steaming cup of coffee. The coffee was bitter, but Abigail was more concerned with its effects of keeping her focused over its taste. Abigail was flipping through the pages of the reports Dr. Banu supplied her with, and they seemed vague at best. Abigail reached for her fork and took a mouthful of blueberry pie. The waitress had recommended it as the best she will ever find, and Abigail could not argue with that title. It was fantastic. Abigail reviewed a summary of findings for any useful information, but had no such luck. The report suggested that the climate of the region had not changed from the prior year, and Abigail found that hard to believe. Abigail flipped into the gauge readings for temperature and the rainfall data, and was shocked to discover that the readings were indeed identical from the previous year. The data must be fabricated, Abigail thought to herself. But why? More coffee? Abigail continued reading as the waitress hovered over her with a fresh pot of coffee, intending to refill her mug. Abigail flipped through some more pages, discounting all that was happening around her. More coffee? The waitress asked louder, this time getting Abigail's attention. Oh, yes, thank you.
Looks like you're deep in thought. Looks like a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo. Yes, it is part of my research. You are not from around here. If I would have to guess, I would say you're here for business. Sort of. My research has led me here. What are you researching? Changes in the climate. Right in time, I would say. Things are getting crazy. A monster of a storm is supposed to be heading our way. And speaking of crazy, if I were you, I would avoid that group of researchers just outside of town. Think they research weather and nature, but they are not right. Rumors have it that they are into a little more than research, if you know what I mean. Intrigued by the waitress's comments, compounded with the researcher's odd display from the day prior, Abigail pried. I do not know what you mean. Could you please explain? Well, the waitress leaned in. Word has it, they have made pacts with the devil in exchange for control over the animals that guard them. That is why the animals are so vicious, to keep their secrecy. Who knows what else they're up to? No one can get to them. Abigail thanked the waitress for the warning and returned to her reading. As she read, she could not help but to think about the truth, which could be found in the rumors of the researchers. She did find it odd that the animals attacked so viciously, but Dr. Benu claimed they would leave her unharmed when she was with Dr. McGray. She also considered that when she spoke with Dr. Benu on the phone, he had no intention of her making it to them at the facilities. He did not even offer a warning of the animals. Abigail quickly rejected the ideas, trusting that the minds of fellow researchers could not be so easily manipulated and twisted. Abigail finished up at the diner and headed back to her hotel, where she would compare her data with the sparse data from Dr. Benu. As she had continued studying her work, she soon disregarded the other research and focused primarily on her own. This is astounding, Abigail said aloud. All of the hotspots are associated with volcanic regions or a mountain range. And if I am to believe what Dr. Benu said about the volcanic activity being everywhere, then that very well could be a volcano. I must be losing it. I am talking to myself. After catching herself in a monologue, Abigail finished the rest of her thoughts in her mind. But she tried to determine her next plan of action. She determined that she needed to create political uproar if anything was going to be accomplished, and therefore headed to the governor of Pennsylvania. Abigail researched directions, packed up her belongings, and checked out of the hotel, since she was not sure when she would be returning, and she did not fear that they would be using the no vacancy sign anytime soon. As Abigail drove, the skies opened up and a downpour began. Abigail's windshield wipers were at their highest setting, but the rain was still leading to visual impairment. She slowed her speed, and since there did not appear to be anyone else on the road, she did not feel the need to pull over. She continued on her way, slow but steady. Abigail arrived at her destination, the office of the political Pennsylvania powerhouse of Governor Ronald Fox. Abigail was unable to find parking at his office, but was able to find parking a few blocks away. Luckily, she had an umbrella in her car and managed to walk staying relatively dry. Hello, my name is Abigail Winthrop. Abigail greeted the receptionist as she entered. I am with the Wellington Research Institute, and I have urgent news for Mr. Fox. Would it be at all possible for him to see me? One moment, please. I will check his schedule for the day. The receptionist turned in her swivel chair and faced her computer, and she typed away at impressive speeds. Only after a few seconds she declared, He is in a meeting right now, but it is scheduled to dismiss in 15 minutes, give or take. If you would like to take a seat, I can see if he will see you afterwards. Thank you very much, Abigail thanked, and she took a seat. Abigail looked around at her surroundings. Fans were placed everywhere and were blowing wildly. The pages of the magazines on the desk in front of Abigail waved happily before her. Abigail contemplated picking up one of the entertainment magazines, but she did not want the distractions. She wanted to focus on what she was going to say. Plus, she found science magazines more entertaining than the popular culture magazines that were available. Abigail concentrated on possible solutions to the world problem, but her concentration broke when two suited men emerged from a closed door behind the receptionist. Abigail then heard, I have an Abigail Winthrop here to see you. The receptionist then rose and grabbed Abigail's attention and declared, Governor Fox will see you now. Abigail stood and approached the door. She took a deep breath and entered a room decorated in mahogany. Thank you for your time, Governor.
Please, call me Ron. Abigail, what? May I call you Abigail?
Of course.
Well, Abigail, what can I do for you?
I am a climate researcher at the Wellington Research Institute, and my research has led me to Pennsylvania. I have been highly invested in the recent anomalies in the weather, and have found it is not what everyone thinks it is. The heat is being generated by volcanoes around the world, and I believe that it is only a matter of time before they start to erupt. I need a prominent political figure like yourself to help me spread the message and warn people who live in the proximity of volcanoes to vacate, until a solution is established, of course. Ron leaned forward on his elbows, squinted his eyes, and pursed his lips.
Interesting. Very interesting, Abigail. Tell me, if this is happening around volcanoes, why come to the great volcano-free state of Pennsylvania?
Well, it turns out that I thought that Pennsylvania was volcano-free as well, until my research has revealed the greatest hotspot is in the middle of your state. Most of the other hotspots circle the more appropriately named fire ring, the volcanoes along the Pacific Ocean. But after I met with the researchers of the ever-natural evolving world, I was informed there is a stagnant volcano here as well.
Wait, not those lunatics. We have been having our quarrels with them ever since they declared that they have ascended above taxes. They think they are some sort of church now. You seem like a bright woman, so please, do not take too much from the talk of those people. I do, however, appreciate you coming to me. And you said largest hotspot was here?
Yes, right here in your own backyard. The mountain region, right by your lunatics, is emanating heat unlike any other hotspot. If something is going to happen, I am predicting that is going to happen at that location.
Have you gone to any other governing bodies?
My mayor said that I had insufficient evidence to pursue my claims, but something is about to happen, and more disasters are sprouting as we speak. As they spoke, the receptionist ran into the room and shouted, "Water is coming into the building quickly, the streets have flooded, and we need to get out of here, pronto." Alarmed, Abigail and Ron ran to the front of the building, witnessing the trees blowing untamed in the bluster, the rain dispensing in buckets, and the streets resembling the waterways of Venice. The three huddled together and stepped outside.
My car is in the basement, and so is Josie's, Ron said in a tense voice. Abigail, please tell me you parked on higher ground.
Abigail thought for a moment, then remembered having to walk down an incline on her way. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did. It's a few blocks this way. Abigail pointed in the direction of her car, and then covered her face to protect her from the cold sting of the raindrops. As they approached the streets, the water levels rose, now catching up to their shins. The streets were not only flooded with water, but they were now flooded with people evacuating their buildings and homes in search of higher grounds. Abigail took one step into the street, and the strong current of the running water knocked her off her feet. She drifted quickly down the street, and Ron extended a hand and quickly grasped hers, pulling her up to safety. "Well, we better be careful," Josie, the receptionist, commented as she removed her high heel shoes, losing 3 inches into the water. The wind whipped about, forcefully knocking people down, knocking tree branches from their once stationary resting place and filling the air with debris. Ron suggested that they all hold hands in case someone else was swept away, which Abigail thought was a great idea. They started moving towards the direction of Abigail's car, but had to stop when they realized the road before them had caved in.
I knew we should have had that sewer replaced years ago, Ron yelled, frustrated. We can either go around it, which is downhill into deeper waters, or try to cross it. It looks like it is only about 8 feet wide.
I say we cross it. The longer we are here, the deeper the water is going to get. The water already rose about 4 inches since we stepped outside, Abigail noted. Ron looked around for ideas and stumbled from the water rushing about his thigh, but he regained himself. Meanwhile, Abigail noticed a hardware store next to them. She waded over to a parked car and kicked off a side mirror and flung it into the window of the hardware store. She jumped through the new opening and disappeared into the store, to re-emerge seconds later with a hammer and a rope. She tied the rope tightly around the hammer and displayed her makeshift grappling hook to Ron and Josie. "Genius," Josie complimented with a smirk. "There's a light post on the other side that we can try to hook." Abigail made 2 attempts to grapple the light post, but both attempts failed. She handed it off to Ron, who made 3 more failed attempts before passing it off to Josie, who miraculously ringed it on the first try. Josie pulled the rope tightly, leaning back on it to allow the others to use it to guide them across. Ron took the rope from Josie.
You two go first, then I will follow.
Abigail took hold of the rope and guided herself across the former street, her feet treading water as the asphalt vanished beneath her. She slowly made her way across, fighting to keep her face above the water as the harsh flow abused her. She almost lost her grip twice, but that allowed her to become more alert. She eventually made it to solid ground, to waters now only waist deep. Josie then grabbed on and pulled herself to the middle of the flowing street. Halfway through her journey, a screaming man being pulled by the water surfaced. He noticed Josie pulling herself in the opposite direction of the flow and managed to drift his way towards her. He reached out and grabbed her foot, pulling her from the rope. Ron dropped the rope and readied himself to take hold of Josie as she rushed by him, but the two collided with Ron, knocking him from his feet, sending all three downstream. Abigail watched in horror as they faded off into the distance, unaware of where they might outlet, but Abigail must move on for her own safety. She trudged through the water, clinging to cars and lamps and any planted object that she could find to keep her from drifting. She eventually made it to her car in one piece, and was delighted that the flooding around her car was only about 2 inches, which she would be able to drive away in. She got into her car and pulled out and headed to higher ground. Higher ground meaning that she would be heading back in the direction of the researchers of the ever-natural evolving world. She figured she might pay them another visit and address them on their faulty data. Chapter 7. Abigail looked around as she stood in the pouring rain, her clothes saturated to the point where the water was just flowing off of her. She looked into the sky, and flaming balls of destruction were crashing down around her. Abigail jumped to dodge the flames and watched as it incinerated a car parked alongside the curb. With a loud crash and the crunching of metal, Abigail covered her ears in anticipation, for she knew the fireball would ignite the gasoline and result in an explosion. The explosion followed, as expected, Abigail narrowly avoiding the projectile door that flew by her. People ran by screaming, all dripping from either the rain or sweating as a result of the extreme temperatures. Abigail watched a man seeking shelter behind a brick wall, but moments later, the man reemerged, bloodied, as he was thrown to the ground by a large bear. The bear continued to maul him until his screams became muffled, and the bear moved on. More animals appeared to join in the havoc, maiming and slaughtering their way through the crowd. Deer, bears, alligators, rabbits, snakes, they were all out for blood. Abigail tried to run, but while she was not looking, a snake coiled around her leg and brought her to the ground. Abigail rolled over onto her back, and the animals all focused their attention on her, as if annoyed by the escape from their last attack. Abigail stared up in horror as the firestorm continued, striking down on animals and humans alike, cremating them all before her eyes. The orange glow and the immense heat were too much to take. Abigail's head felt dizzy, and she let it slip to the pavement. Abigail opened her eyes to be safely resting in her hotel room. She raised her head and looked around, her blanket strewn across the room, and her sheets disheveled. Why have her dreams become so odd? She thought to herself. She stood and approached the window to peek outside to see if the sun had risen yet. She drew back the curtains, but when the orange glow snuck in, she dropped the cloth and closed it before her. She held herself for a minute to make sure she was not still dreaming, and re-gripped the curtain. She pulled it open and stared in disbelief. Streams of fire were cutting through the sky, like in her dream, miniature balls of fire striking the ground and burning up the town. The air was almost silent outside. No one was in sight. Had they all left? Or were they still asleep, waiting to be overcome by a burning slumber? Abigail had to warn the others if she could. Abigail grabbed her pants, which were neatly folded on a chair, and pulled out the lighter, which she still carried from the power outage. She hoped that it had dried off enough to be functional. She tried to spark the lighter twice with no results, but accredited that to her minimal amount of practice. On the third, a flame appeared. Abigail climbed onto the top of her bed and held the flame to the fire detector in the room. Almost instantaneously, a deafening alarm echoed through the room. Abigail hopped from the bed and quickly got dressed, and ran into the hallway, where she was joined by the other patrons of the hotel. Eyelids half shut, they groggily made their way to the exit, but upon seeing the inferno that was once the parking lot, their eyes opened all the way. Some cried out in horror, while others questioned what was happening. But Abigail had an idea. She believed it could all be explained by the volcano. Abigail ran outside, braving the fiery hail, and attempted to make it to her car. Common sense would dictate that she traveled in the opposite direction, but She could not help it. She was being drawn to the volcano. She needed to find out what was happening, and she needed to continue her research. Abigail made her way through the flaming obstacles, the soot and the ash in the air making it hard to see. She saw her car at the end of the parking lot and was overjoyed to see no harm had come to it yet. Others around her packed into their cars and took off, many crashing into one another or the hotel itself, but not waiting around to exchange insurance information. Abigail entered her car and remained more collected than the others, panicked around her. Perhaps because she was not trying to escape the terror, but head towards it. Abigail started her car and turned on the windshield wipers to clear the dark dust from the glass. She pulled out of her space and pulled onto the street. Both lanes of the streets were packed with cars going in the same direction. The problem for Abigail was that she needed to go in the opposite direction. She pulled onto the sidewalk and continued very slowly, honking her horn, trying to clear a path through crazed pedestrians and oncoming cars. Abigail decided to see if she could pick up a radio station to help ease her mind from the frustratingly slow drive. She tuned into a local news broadcaster.
Fire and brimstone raining from the sky. Is it a sign of the apocalypse? By looking out the window, we can all see that one of the mountains is spewing fireballs into the air. Experts claim it is not a typical mountain behavior. We just received more reports from across the globe that all known volcanoes and some unknown volcanoes are simultaneously erupting. The world is left in chaos as a dark cloud of ash shadow the sky. No one is certain what is happening, but all I can ask is that you pray for your loved ones who may be caught in danger.
Abigail clicked off the radio. Her jaw still dropped from the initial reaction. It appears nowhere is safe anymore, Abigail thought to herself. Abigail let her mind wander, but slammed on her brakes at the sight of a child, no more than 6 years of age, cowering on the sidewalk in front of her car. Abigail looked around cautiously for the little boy's parents, but no adults seemed to be paying the child any mind. Abigail got out of the car and placed a comforting hand on the back of the boy. "Where are your parents?" Abigail asked in a soothing voice. "In your car," the child snickered as he looked up and ran towards Abigail's car, which was now occupied by 2 grungy adults. Abigail grabbed the child by the back of the shirt, foiling his getaway plans. Or so she thought. The boy's mother and father saw that their child had been captured and continued to back up the car, which Abigail foolishly left running with her keys in the ignition. Abigail watched as the 2 miscreants drove away with her car, but more importantly, her research. Her shoulders sunk as she realized she now had a child to be responsible for. She looked at the little wretch responsible for her car dilemma, but could not blame him for faulty parenting. "What is your name?" Abigail bent over and asked. The boy spit in Abigail's face and kicked her in the shin, causing her to lose hold of his shirt. The boy turned tail and fled into the ruckus. Abigail declared that he was no longer her problem. What was her problem was the 2-mile walk in the blistering heat to the research facilities. Abigail was determined, however, and started off with her head held high. After a few blocks, she realized she was actually traveling faster on foot than she was in her car. Along the walk, Abigail saw horrendous displays of humanity, people attacking one another rather than helping them to safety, numerous injured and a few dead, lying there with no signs of ash or flames about them. They were trampled by ignorance and haste. Disgusted, Abigail quickened her pace until she came across an abandoned bicycle, her vehicle of choice. Without hesitation, Abigail commandeered the bike and pushed off. Abigail pedaled out of the town, and the traffic died down. No one was stricken with the insanity of driving towards the source of the devastation. No one was that insane, except Abigail Winthrop. Chapter 8. Abigail banged on the front of the research facility after no one answered the ring of the bell. Abigail turned and faced the woods, which she was able to navigate easily this time from the speed and safety of her new bicycle. She did not want to go back into the woods, coming all this way for nothing. Abigail then remembered that Dr. Benu claimed they would burn with the volcano. They must be closer to the volcano, she concluded. Abigail walked around to the back of the building and followed a path that appeared to be directed up the mountain. Abigail set her bike aside and entered the trail. Each step she took, she could hear the crinkling of burnt leaves underneath her feet. The air smelled of sulfur, and her eyes stung. Sweat dripped into her eyes, making the agony even worse. Yet she continued. As she approached, She heard the subtle beating of a drum coming from ahead. She followed the beat and was led to a clearing. In the middle of a clearing knelt a dozen or so men and women, each dressed in a red and purple robe. Abigail could not identify any of them as the two researchers she met because her vision was blurred and each wore a hood. Abigail watched from the outskirts of the clearing while the group began chanting. Abigail could not make out the language they spoke, but shivers traversed her spine as an uneasiness settled over her. Who are these people, and what are they doing? Abigail thought to herself. Are these the researchers? Are they worshipping the volcano? The group all rose to their feet, and one pulled back the hood. His bald head could have been that of Dr. Benu, but he was still too far away to be certain. The unhooded man pointed at two others, and they approached, pulling with them a third, who struggled against them as they walked. The two pulled the robe off the resistant one, revealing a young man, dressed in jeans, with no shirt and no shoes. They grabbed him and forcefully placed him on a stone slab in front of them. Is that an altar? Abigail mouthed without speaking. Two more approached, and the four each took an appendage of the shirtless man. The could-be Dr. Benu then reached into his robe and pulled out a dagger. He pointed it at the spewing volcano, and he began his chant again. As he chanted, he slowly placed the tip of the dagger at the throat of the man, now frozen in fear. The armed man then plunged the dagger into the neck, spilling a maroon offering onto the ground below. Abigail gasped in horror at the sacrifice, which caused her to give away her position. She stumbled backwards as two of the robed beings approached her. They quickly seized her and pulled her towards the altar. Abigail was not pleased to learn that the bald man from the distance was indeed Dr. Benu, and one of the four men holding down the man that lay lifeless was Dr. McGray. "Greetings, my dear," Dr. Benu said in a smug manner. "I knew our partial research would entice you to return." "You just murdered a man," Abigail shouted as she was restrained. "It is not murder, it is for the greater good." "I thought you were a man of science." "Science is a broad spectrum, and this volcano governs all." "You are irrational," Abigail shouted, trying to struggle free. "Calm yourself. Allow me to explain. Many years ago, when the researchers first settled upon this region, or, more appropriately, were drawn here, they began to notice unusual happenstance. Illnesses among them disappeared. Animals aided them in foraging, and from time to time the earth would shake beneath them. They were one with nature, and knew that they could learn great things to benefit mankind. Unfortunately, society labeled our predecessors and judged them, disregarding their findings as nonsense. This was no way to treat scientists. As the years passed, and the generations continued, the researchers recruited younger, more talented minds to continue and join their cause. We lost interest in researching for the benefit of the others, and turned our focus into researching to become closer to the great power of the volcano. The volcano can do things you can only dream of. Like heat up the world and cause destruction, or convince a group of doctors to commit murder? I know my next words will probably bring me harm, but you're all lunatics. A volcano is a volcano, nothing more. This certain volcano is an anomaly, and has characteristics that coincide with the current weather conditions, but nothing else, nothing supernatural. Abigail ended her struggle to break free, realizing the fight to be pointless. "When you approached us, I had great hopes for you," Dr. Benu explained, with a stern look on his face. "I thought you were called to us, not by chance, but by fate. I thought you were the next great researcher, but I was confused. You could have had an offer, but your words lead me to believe that you are not a believer. As I watch the mountain before us continue to spew forth its gift to the world, I understand your true purpose. Take her to the holding cell. Tomorrow she shall ascend." The two cult researchers that clutched Abigail pulled her backwards, back into the woods. She watched as the other researchers turned their attention back to the volcano, now emitting a hazy aura. Abigail was not certain what Dr. Benu's intentions were with her, but she had a feeling that no good could come from it. When Abigail re-entered the facility, she was thrown into a room with a mattress on the floor and an empty metal bowl, and bars on the small 2-foot by 1-foot window. The two that were holding her placed her on the floor, joining her in the room, but locked the door behind them. They both removed their hoods, revealing one to be Dr. McGray, and the other a brunette female, looking to be aged in her 40s. Neither one wore any expression on their face, nor said a word. They each just stared at Abigail. "Why are you doing this to me? I am just a researcher like both of you." "You are nothing like us," the female said, barely raising her voice. "You got Dr. Benut's hopes up. He thought you were sincere, but it turns out you're just a pretender," Dr. McGray sighed. "I never pretended anything. I just wanted to understand the nature of the weather." "Your fate is sealed. Save your words. I would suggest becoming at peace with your mind. It will soon join the volcano. I feel obligated to offer you some water in this heat, so that you are capable tomorrow." Abigail hesitated for a moment, making sure she understood what Dr. McGray's companion was implying about tomorrow's events. Abigail then obliged the offer and shook her head that she would accept a glass of water. Dr. McGray stayed with Abigail, while the robed woman left, locking the door behind her. Abigail and Dr. McGray sat again in silence. Abigail turned her head slowly toward the window, which was open to a view of the volcano. Abigail's eyes went wide, and she dropped her jaw. She slowly covered her mouth with her hand, and Dr. McGray grew intrigued. He leaned in and approached the window to get a better view. Just the distraction Abigail was hoping for. She quickly sprang across the room and picked up the metal bowl. She struck Dr. McGray on the side of the head with the bowl. The doctor wobbled temporarily, and Abigail struck him again. She struck him once more, bringing him to his knees, and then one final time, laying him down. Abigail stopped the assault at that, showing him mercy. She then crouched by the door, with bowl in hand, hoping to overcome her other captor when she returned with the water. Abigail heard the turning of the keys in the door and readied her hand above her head. The door slowly cracked, and a brunette head emerged. Abigail swung down, and the body fell before her. Abigail pulled the door open and jumped the sprawled-out body, only to be met by the remaining researchers, all watching.
"Feisty," Dr. Benut snickered with a smile. "The volcano will surely appreciate your tenacity."
3 of the researchers stripped Abigail of her bowl and locked her back in the room after removing their unconscious brethren. Abigail now sat in solitude, deeming it useless to attempt to call for help, seeing how her remote location was more than isolated, and any reasonable person would be escaping to safer grounds. Abigail reclined on the mattress and tried to get some sleep. It was all she could do. She was in the hands of the researchers of the ever-natural, evolving world now. Chapter 9. Abigail awoke from the turning of the doorknob. She sat alert on her mattress as her captives entered the room. It was Dr. Benut, and he entered alone. He pulled in a folding chair and opened it alongside the mattress where Abigail stayed sitting. The doctor sat slowly in the chair and then crossed his legs, staring at Abigail, wearing a self-satisfied smirk.
"I respect you, Miss Winthrop. No one has ever made it as far as you have in search for answers, and for that you have my appreciation. It is science and the thirst for knowledge that led us all here, and out of this respect, I feel I owe it to you to explain what is really happening. We researchers are essentially protectors of the volcano. We tend to its needs and desires, and as a result we are rewarded with health and prosperity. The volcano has great powers, both holistic and destructive. In the research you conduct, I am sure you are familiar with the cyclic nature of weather patterns. What causes highs and lows in temperature as the decades progress? It is not as if we are being affected differently by the sun. It is not as if so-called greenhouse gases leave, then come back years later. And it is not as if society has any influence over it. There is one elite group that does not have influence over it, and they are here right before you, the researchers of the ever-natural, evolving world."
At first, Abigail was remotely listening as she tried to devise a way of overpowering the doctor and making a second escape attempt. But something about the words he was speaking was drawing her in. She wanted to know more. "So, you control the mountain?" "Not at all. We do monitor it and try to maintain its desires. I know you think we are crazy, personifying a volcano as having desires, but allow me to clarify.
When the temperatures of the world begin a trend of increasing, as you have found, the heat source is being produced from the volcano. It is why the Earth survives. This is when the volcano's desires are its greatest. When this occurs, it is our responsibility to calm the volcano. And the only way we have found to do so, as you witnessed last night, is to spill blood upon its base. You may find this barbaric and may question the morality of it all, as of each and every one of us. We would not be human if we did not do so, but it is a small price to pay to avoid global meltdown.
How did you find taking a life calms the volcano?
The ritual was established before my time, and I am to understand it was quite accidental. In one of the more extreme temperature increases, a frantic researcher tripped and split his skull open on a boulder at the base of the volcano. The very next day, the temperatures halted the increase, and they started to subside. As a result, the boulder was transfigured into an altar, and the location was the place that you stood last night. When the next temperature surge began, another sacrifice was performed, yielding similar results. A tradition was born.
Where do you get the people from? The man last night did not look willing. And do you have to kill them? What about other bloodletting practices that do not result in death? What about animals?
We have made various attempts to figure out an alternate non-fatal method, but they were unsuccessful. As for the victims, it is unfortunate, but they are not willing participants. We get most of them from the surrounding cities. We travel by nightfall and pick up vagabonds and the homeless mostly. People who have already been discarded and will not be greatly missed. So far it has been working, as we have never been tied to any of the missing persons. We are also very humane in our endeavors. We explain to them that their actions will help procure the longevity of the world, and we drug them to numb the pain. It is by no means an act of brutality.
If you made the sacrifice last night, why is the volcano still erupting today? Shouldn't it have stopped by now, based on what you're saying?
You are very observant, and you are correct. This is highly irregular, and to be honest, we fear it is our doings. In a moment of weakness, we researchers decided to let the sacrifice lapse and let the world suffer its share of torment. We were tired of the ridicule for the thankless jobs we do. We ensure the safety of them all, yet we are mocked. We tried to publish work on our findings many years ago, but all of our work was disregarded. By letting the sacrifice lapse, the temperatures grew more extreme and the natural disasters started. We were unsure of what exactly was going to happen, but we were pleased with the outcome.
You let thousands, maybe millions of people die? Because of a snicker here and there?
Essentially, yes. As I said, it was a moment of weakness. As we were meeting to discuss when to put an end to the chaos, the volcanoes around the world started to erupt. Believe me when I say, this was not our intention. We have never seen our volcano erupt, nor did we think it ever would. We immediately prepared our sacrifice and fully intended to stop the devastation. What we did not expect was that the volcano would continue to boil after the sacrifice. It should have stopped. That is where you come in.
Me? I barely know anything about your volcano. What can I do?
The volcano did not stop because it demands a more worthy sacrifice. It needs someone intelligent, someone strong, someone brave, someone who understands. Someone like you, Abigail. I could not find a sacrifice so precious if I searched for 1,000 years. In just a few hours, you will stand before the almighty giver and taker of life, and you shall become one with it.
Overcome with excessive amounts of fear and anger, Abigail stood and charged Dr. Benu. She had nothing to lose. She was going to be killed today. She lunged at the doctor, but was caught midair by other researchers that rushed into the room. They dragged her out of her room and into what they referred to as the preparation area. Abigail was cleaned up of the blood, sweat, and soot that covered her body. She was given a clean pair of clothes, fashionably colored in red and purple, and her hair was tied back tightly in a bun. The researchers that were preparing Abigail were all female at the request of Dr. Benu, still granting her decency and common courtesy. Abigail was strapped down to a cold metal table, and she felt a harsh prick in her forearm. Her head began to spin, and a tingling sensation overcame her body. "Did you drug me?" Abigail asked.
expecting that they would. "Yes, dear," one of the researchers answered. "You're going to do a great deed today. Many of us are envious that Dr. Benu chose you for this." Abigail closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for her final thoughts. Time passed quickly as she felt her body lifted from the table and carried off. They took her outside, her body suspended on the outstretched arms of the robed figures beside her. So this was it, Abigail thought. This is how her life ends. Was it all worth it? She dedicated her life to research and the quest to understand the climate, and oddly enough, that is where her life was ending. Her research led her here, and she received the answers. But did she believe them? Could a volcano dictate the climate of an entire planet? Could a volcano have an appetite for human blood? The more she thought about what she was told, the more skeptical she became. Unfortunately, she was in no place to find her true answers. She would have to pass on knowing only what she had been told in life. Perhaps the afterlife will provide more answers. The afterlife, an idea Abigail found equally as absurd as a bloodthirsty volcano. Abigail was placed down on the stone altar, her limbs going numb from whatever foreign chemicals pumped through her veins. She was still mentally alert, but was able to do nothing more than stare. She stared up at the sun, which was blinding her, but what did she care? The face of Dr. Benu appeared over her as he leaned in closer.
"It demands a great sacrifice," Dr. Benu addressed his followers. "All will be well once more. Prepare to soar above the mundane existence and be part of history."
Two of the hooded researchers sat Abigail up and faced her towards the volcano. Dr. Benu approached her from behind and drew his dagger. He then whispered some final words into Abigail's ear.
"Slitting your throat will end it quickly. You will not feel a thing. I apologize for it escalating to this."
Abigail tried to tense up, but her muscles were too relaxed. She felt a dull sensation of the dagger pressed at her throat as Dr. Benu yelled out praise to the volcano. Abigail held her breath in preparation and watched the volcano, the bane of her existence. Just as she was expecting for her world to go black, a sea of gasps erupted around her. Something had happened to shock all the researchers. Abigail squinted at the volcano, and instead of seeing the sight of molten fireballs that they had all become used to, a new scene was present. Something was protruding from the fiery mountain, something resembling a beak. Chapter 10. All of the followers watched in amazement as an enormous fire beast broke through the mountain. Emerging through the tip of the volcano, the glowing creature, standing hundreds of feet tall, spread its magnificent wings. The beast, resembling a bird, let loose a chilling shriek before taking flight into the air. As it flew off, a trail of smoke and dissipating embers followed. Abigail could tell by all the faces of the researchers that they did not expect a bird to crawl out of the volcano that their people have been worshipping for over 200 years. Abigail knew that there was no longer a knife held to her throat. She tried to turn around, but the mixture of the adrenaline produced from the spectacle and the relaxation drugs in her system were too much. Abigail's eyelids began to flutter, and she slumped over onto the altar.
"Wake up, Miss Abigail Winthrop."
Who? Abigail opened her eyes to the familiar sight of the room she was locked in the previous night. Dr. Benu crouched in front of her with a worried look drawn upon his face.
"Simply amazing," Dr. Benu said. "To think, all these years, we were harboring a creature of such greatness, and before our eyes it is born."
"Are you still going to kill me?"
"No, we are not monsters," Dr. Benu informed. "There would be no use in sacrificing you now. The creature is no longer here."
"Well, that's good news." Abigail could not help but let a smile slip through.
"Perhaps when it returns," Dr. Benu joked, letting his own smile show through.
"Can I leave?"
"That is a tricky question, my dear. I do not wish you harm, and I sincerely apologize for the nature of our encounters, and hope you are not holding any resentment. But it is understandable if you are. I could not let you go if you plan on striking back against us, but I also do not wish to hold you captive. We have no way of holding you to your word if you tell us you wish us no harm in the future, which leaves me to where I am now. Should I let you go, or should I choose you to stay?"
To be honest with you, I am a little sore about you trying to offer me to an inanimate object. I thought the bunch of you were crazy, but then, when I saw a gigantic flaming bird crawl out of a mountain, your beliefs did not seem all that outlandish anymore. I understand what you were trying to do, and I acknowledge that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you let me go, I promise, as one seeker of answers to another, that no ill doings will come to you by my hand.
We were all hoping that was your sentiment. We have prepared your bike and wish you the best. I doubt you will take us up on the offer, but you're welcome here whenever you like.
Abigail cautiously exited the room, followed by exiting the facilities, half expecting it to be a trick. She departed and climbed onto her bike and pedaled away, without any opposition. As Abigail rode through the woods, she considered her promise to the doctor. Did she want to retaliate? Perhaps get the law enforcement agencies involved for their kidnappings and murders? Abigail decided that it was best not to pursue that option at the moment, seeing how there were more important matters at hand, such as a flaming creature born to the earth. The streets were empty, and the air was still ashy. The good news was there was no sign of bird in the sky. Abigail was unsure of what her next destination was, so she decided if she headed to the diner she ate at a few days earlier, she could rest and formulate a plan. The diner was a few miles away, and even though she was tired and her spirits were broken, she pushed along. She arrived to an empty diner, as she expected it would be, and let herself in through the shattered glass door. She jumped behind the counter and checked the television to see if anything was airing.
One knows what the creature is, but what we do know is that the creature does not come in peace. San Diego, Paris, Montreal, Atlanta, Sydney, all are among the cities destroyed by this being, which does not appear to be of this world. What we do know is that it moves with great speeds across the world, stomping down on the cities which erupt into flames. There only appears to be one of them, and it almost looks like a gigantic fiery bird.
Abigail left the television on, but focused her attention on foraging for food over watching the news progress. She fumbled around the diner for some pre-made food so that she could move on. Abigail settled on cereal, but was unable to find the milk she required to top off the meal. Giving up her minuscule efforts, she settled on water and hovered her bowl of cereal underneath the faucet. As she saturated her meal, she heard the ring of a bell, a ring that she recognized as the front door. Why someone would open a shattered door was beyond her, she thought, as she ducked behind the counter to spy on her company.
"Hello? Is anybody in here?"
asked the tattered and hoarse voice of an elderly lady.
"I believe I saw someone enter moments ago, but I cannot be too sure of anything at my age."
Regarding the aged woman she watched as harmless, Abigail popped her head up from the counter. "Hello, I am here." Even though she was expecting someone to be in the diner, the older lady still jumped as she was startled by Abigail's voice.
"Goodness me, aren't you a sight for cataracted eyes? We were wondering if you could be of any assistance to us."
Seeing only one person in front of her, Abigail questioned whether or not the woman was slightly senile, but offered a chance to clarify. "Are there more people left in town?"
"Yes, a few of us were left behind, 4 to be exact. All of us are what you might classify as elderly. Our families disregarded us for some reason or another when they packed up and left town. The heat is starting to get to us, and we are not sure of how much longer we could survive here."
"Well, I do not plan on staying in this town too much longer. What sort of assistance did you have in mind?"
"If you could drive us as far north as you are going, towards cooler weather, we would be much obliged."
"I am heading north, but all I have is a bicycle. I'm afraid I cannot carry 4 passengers."
"Well, dearie, we have a car. Why don't you use that? This way, we help each other out."
"That would be great," Abigail smiled. "But if you have a car, how come you did not drive yourself out of town?"
"About 2 months ago, the townsfolk started enforcing the elderly license removal program, which took the license away of those over 75 years of age if they got into too many accidents or were deemed legally blind. I was a victim of the latter, but to be honest, I endorsed the plan, and I think it has made the streets safer. But rules are rules, and disaster or not, I am not authorized to drive, and neither are my 3 friends."
"When would you be ready to go?" Abigail asked, trying to quickly think of where she wanted to go. She should head south to Washington, D.C., and try to offer her insights to what was happening But she would have to drop off the old folks first.
We are ready to go when you are. Let me tell the others.
The elderly lady pulled the door open and waved to 3 older gentlemen standing across the street. She took small steps to approach them, and Abigail followed alongside. Abigail heard inaudible murmurs from the men from afar, but once she got within earshot, she heard their complaints.
It's too hot. How about this weather? It is drying up my skin. Do you have any lotion? I never did like the birds, especially flaming alien birds. I am serious. My skin is drying up. I need water. Hush up, Lloyd. We're all dry. Just pleasures of growing old.
Abigail introduced herself, but did not pay attention to them as they each introduced themselves. Instead, she continued thinking of what she had to do. Nice to meet all of you. Where's the car?
Right this way,
The older woman said as she pulled a set of keys from her purse. Does anyone have any friends or family they can stay with? Where exactly would you like me to take you?
Wherever you're heading, we would not want to be much of a bother,
One of the men said. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure where I'm going, so I can drive you somewhere while I try to figure that out.
That is kind,
The man said, then turned his head towards newspapers that were blowing in the street. As the papers frolicked in the wind and tumbled through the air, they ignited into flames.
Did you see that? That is how hot it is. It is getting hotter by the moment. We need to get out of here. I'm burning up.
Abigail watched as the man's complaints of burning up turned into a reality as he combusted before their eyes. They all watched in horror as the flames danced from his skin, singeing his clothes and dropping him to the ground. Quickly, into the car, Abigail screamed as she placed her arms around the others and flocked them towards the vehicle. The others moved as quickly as their feeble bodies would allow, which was not as fast as Abigail would have hoped. In efforts to escape to safety, one of the other men stumbled over his feet and took a spill. Upon colliding with the asphalt pavement, the man burst into flames, his skin crackling, with harsh screams echoing in Abigail's ears, but she continued on. "Mortimer!" the old woman screamed as she reached back to her friend, but it was too late. There was nothing she could do. Abigail pulled the 2 remaining with her forward to the car, but immediately released the lady when she realized the pain traversing her arm was due to the woman herself lighting up. Abigail watched her crumple to the ground, and she turned towards the remaining man, who watched in dismay. He knew it was only a matter of time before his dehydrated skin led to his demise. Surely enough, he joined the ranks of the others and tumbled over burning. Now, with nothing slowing her down, Abigail hurtled over the bodies, making her way towards the car. She quickly fumbled with the keys to get inside the car, which was sweltering. She started the car and opened the windows to cool it down. She took off down the road, giving in to turning on the air conditioning for her own well-being. Abigail decided that since she did not have to make a detour up north, she would head straight to Washington, D.C., and see if she could offer any assistance. She flipped on the radio to see how the rest of society was faring, and was not surprised to hear that similarly to what she had just witnessed, people all over the world were suffering from spontaneous combustion, particularly the elderly.
Chapter 11.
This thing breathes fire.
I hear it incinerates everything it touches, and that is so powerful,
Your eyes will burn just by looking directly at it.
you know it is an alien trying to wipe us out so it can lay our eggs to allow its demon spawns to consume the planet. That is preposterous. It's not an alien. The whole thing has been a government cover-up from the get-go. First, the weather manipulation. We all know the government had a hand in that, but they screw it up, and people's eyes have opened. We all knew what they were up to as the tornadoes and the hurricanes revealed their lies, so they created a distraction. So this so-called monster is likely just a holographic image that they use while they bomb places they wanted out of the way anyway. That is why I'm standing right outside the White House, because they are not going to blow themselves up. Abigail tried to zone out the chatter of the people's conclusions that they so haphazardly jumped to. She tried to make her way through the mob of angry citizens all marching to the White House, trying to get answers. Abigail arrived in Washington, D.C. a few hours earlier after driving straight through, but hit a roadblock in the form of people. With the combination of people per square foot density compounded by the intense heat, breathing was difficult. Even the healthiest pair of lungs would agree. Using her slender figure to her advantage, Abigail was able to slink her way towards the front gates, where she was hoping to find someone to listen to her. Upon arriving at the gates, Abigail witnessed the attacks displayed on a large projector screen set up on the president's front lawn. The Firebird soared over what looked to be St. Louis, based on the arc.
Hundreds of soldiers, armed with a complete arsenal, marched the streets and fired upon the beast. The bird was unfazed by their attempts to stop it, and was equally unaware to the tanks and planes that fired upon it. After cruising in the air for about 2 minutes, the bird changed direction to the ground and did a nosedive straight into a gas station. Upon striking the earth, the ground and everything around it was engulfed in flames, and after the flames reached the camera filming the display, the screen turned to static. The projector then went back up again, now showing the bird over London. Abigail turned to a man who looked as though he had been standing there for a while and asked, "This is not live, is it? Where's the thing now?"
They've been playing the attacks on loop since I got here. As many cities as they were able to get digital videos from, they are playing. I am guessing to unite the public against a common enemy. London was last night, and St. Louis was this morning. Talk on the radio said somewhere in South Africa is under attack right now.
So, is it just flying around destroying cities?
At first, it was targeting nuclear power plants, and then turned to oil refineries. Their goal looks to be to knock out the power supply. It's a good military strategy. We are dealing with professionals.
Professional what?
A superior race who knows how to dominate a planet.
What if it did not come from another planet, but was from this world? Abigail offered insight.
Impossible. Someone would have seen something that big. Plus it's on fire. Something like that is hard to hide. Unlike the Sasquatch and the Yeti, which could hide practically anywhere.
What if no one saw it because it was inside of the Earth?
So you're telling me that our home is just some sort of egg for a monster race of flaming birds, and people thought I was out there?
Realizing that if she was not able to convince a conspiracy theorist standing outside of the White House of the bird's true origins, she was going to have a hard time convincing anyone in the government. She abandoned her conversation and continued her attempts to talk to someone on the inside. "Excuse me," Abigail grabbed the attention of an armed security officer. "I need to speak with someone on the inside. I know where this thing is from, and I could help explain some of what is happening all over the world."
Sorry, miss, but everyone out here thinks they're absolutely certain they know what is going on. And I have heard about 203 different stories. Now, they cannot all be right, but I am sure yours must be. Would you care to enlighten me what is really going on?
I do not appreciate the mockery. I'm a well-respected member at the Wellington Research Institute, and my focus is on climate change. The climate change was being caused by the bird, which was nested inside of the Earth and surfaced out of a volcano. I saw it with my own eyes. I need to tell someone so that they can stop wasting lives trying to blow it up. We need to coerce it back into the mountains. It's been part of our ecosystem and must remain so. Otherwise, this could throw everything off the delicate balance.
Balance? Do things look balanced? Your theory was alright. But my personal favorite is the one that involves the ghosts of extinct animals seeking revenge. Now, will you please step aside?
Abigail turned away, frustrated again that no one will hear her out. What will it take to get into these people's thick skulls? Abigail questioned aloud.
A drill usually works,
commented a rugged-looking man. His unshaven face and wild gray hair gave the impression that he could have been homeless, but his fancy suit and flashy watch diminished the thought.
I heard what you had to say, and I know you're right.
Excuse me? Abigail turned her head, intrigued.
I know you were right, the man repeated in a raspy voice. People are not willing to accept the fact that this so-called monster was living amongst us, and in fact helps maintain the homeostasis.
But if no one will listen, what good is it having this knowledge?
Do not lose hope. There are reasons to know everything. You are a very powerful woman. I can tell by your presence. And there are people that will listen to you. You have just come to the wrong place. When have the men that run this country ever done anything remotely intelligent? If they cannot bomb it, they are not interested.
Pardon my bluntness, but if you loathe them so, then why are you standing outside of the White House?
I am waiting.
Waiting for what?
I'm waiting for you.
Caught off guard by the disturbing tone in which the man delivered the last sentence, Abigail took a step backwards into a wall of people. I better be going now.
Wait.
The man reached out his hand, grabbing Abigail by the arm.
I did not mean to come off in such a manner. I am waiting for someone who knows the truth, and I want to help lead them, lead you, in the right direction. Here, take this card. On it, you will find the name of a woman who will listen to you. She is much more than she seems. She knows exactly what we need to do.
Abigail took the card and read it over. Madam Jord, 123 New Earth Way, Charlotte, North Carolina. Abigail looked back up the man and asked, "If I do choose to visit her, who should I tell her sent me?" The man smiled, while he started to disappear into the crowd.
She knows you are on her way, but tell her Hank sent you. Might as well take credit for a good deed.
Abigail shoved the card into her pocket and faced the crowd, slowly making her way out of the mob. She was uncertain what to expect in North Carolina, but she was certain there was no one who was going to hear her out in Washington. She got back into her newly acquired car and rolled down the windows. Looks like she was going on another road trip. Chapter 12. Abigail knew well enough to navigate the highways to travel south to North Carolina with no trouble. Once she entered the state, she was able to follow the signs toward her destination of Charlotte. When she got to the city, she decided it was time to ask a gas station attendant for directions. Following the clear directions from the gas station worker, she pulled up in front of a rundown house on New Earth Way. The windows were boarded up, and the grass that was still alive was overgrown and full of weeds. "Doesn't look like anyone lives here," Abigail said to herself. Abigail exited her car and was met with the cruel, unair-conditioned atmosphere outside the luxury of her car. She locked up the car and double-checked the handle because she did not feel like she was in the safest of neighborhoods, even though the city looked abandoned. Abigail climbed the steps leading to a wooden door, half covered in chipped blue paint. Abigail struck the door with her knuckles, announcing her arrival, and knocked off a few more flakes of blue while doing so. She listened intently to see if she could hear anyone stirring inside, but all she heard was the creaking of the house with every gust of wind. After a second round of knocking, Abigail heard a voice from the other side of the door.
Who calls upon me?
Asked the high-pitched cackle of a woman. "My name is Abigail Winthrop. I was told you could help me. Hank sent me."
Well, Hank does not like to send people my way. What seems to be your problem?
"I know what is going on with the weather and the Firebird, and I'm trying to find someone to listen to me so that we can stop it."
Many say they know what is going on, but truly do not understand. Please inform me.
Well, from what I've gathered, the climate change was brought about by the bird, which lived inside the Earth and had a part in controlling the weather. We know cyclic temperature fluctuations occur as far back as we have data, and I believe the bird is the reason. The recent natural disasters have been a precursor for the birth of the bird, out of the dormant volcano in Pennsylvania. Now, the bird is loose and delivering havoc, and I believe that in order to return the world to normalcy, we need to get the bird back inside of the Earth to once again maintain it. The door swung open, and a woman with black frizzy hair, appearing to be in her 50s, stood with a smile, revealing multiple spaces where teeth once stood.
I've been waiting for you. Hank sent many others my way, but it appears you are the only one who understands.
"So you are familiar. How do you know about this? I witnessed it, but if I had not, I doubt it would be my first explanation of what is happening."
What is happening is the way of the world. It is only a matter of time, and it is up to you to continue the legacy. If you fail, we all will perish.
Madame Jord delivered the last words with peril in her eyes. "It sounds like you know what has to be done. What can we do to stop this?"
There is only one way to face the creature, but if you are indeed the one to take it on, I must be certain that you are committed to the cause. There is a great risk, and even greater responsibility. The balance of the world will lie in your hands.
I've dedicated my entire life to solving climate issues. It is what I live for, and in a way, it is almost all I know. Even if I wanted to decline this responsibility, I do not have the power to choose. The decision has been made for me. I need to know how this is going to end, and I need to be part of it. I can just feel it. Besides, if I do nothing, there is a good chance we all die anyway. So, I am alright with the notion of self-sacrifice, if there is a chance to save billions.
I believe you are ready to accept the challenge ahead. Please, join me inside. I will make us some tea.
Abigail followed the woman into her dark house, and the two made their way towards the kitchen. Abigail looked around the dim house, which was cluttered with porcelain figures of birds. "Looks like you really like wildlife."
Huh? Oh, yes. I like to collect. Can I offer you a fresh pomegranate?
"No thank you. The tea will be fine."
Cream or sugar?
"I will take it plain, thank you."
Do you have any idea what you are in for?
To be honest with you, I do not. What exactly am I going to have to do to stop what is happening?
It is better if you do not know. Hesitation could alter the outcome.
Sensing the awkward direction of the conversation, Abigail checked the possible egress routes from the house. A window in the kitchen, as well as a back door, which was barricaded with clutter. Then there was always the front door. "I'm sorry, but if I do not know, how do you expect me to do whatever it is that you say I'm supposed to do?"
So curious. I can see why you're the one. Here is your tea. Drink up.
Abigail took the warm mug, but with the growing distrust for the odd woman, Abigail did not drink it. Perhaps there was a mistake. "I think I will be going." Abigail placed the tea down on the marble kitchen counter and headed for the front door. Madame Jord dropped her tea in a flash and appeared in front of Abigail, cutting off her planned escape.
Now, we cannot have you leaving just yet.
The woman opened her palm in front of Abigail's face and blew gently into it. A cloud of green dust flourished from her hand and enveloped Abigail's head. Abigail tried to hold her breath to prevent any of the unknown substance from entering her lungs, but her efforts were in vain. The minuscule particles acted as if they knew where to go and crept into Abigail's nostrils. Abigail's vision became blurred, and the room started to spin around her. All she could see was the laughing face of a crazed woman as she took a knee and lost consciousness. Chapter 13. She opened her eyes as the face of a flaming bird was glaring into hers. Startled, Abigail jumped, awakening herself from another dream. This time, she sat in her car. What happened to her, she thought, and why was she in her car? Abigail recalled the scenario where she was rendered unconscious with a ball of spores. An odd throbbing sensation pulsed through Abigail's brain. Not a painful sensation, but a rejuvenating sensation. Much like a good night's sleep. Something Abigail was only able to dream about. What did she do to me? Abigail asked to herself, while looking at the unfamiliar surroundings outside of her window. Her muscles were tense, but she felt empowered. Perhaps Madame Jord was not crazy, but actually did something useful. Abigail's stomach sank as she quickly thought to check for her wallet. It was missing. "I was robbed!" Abigail screamed in her confined space. Abigail punched the steering wheel, mad at herself for driving from the White House to North Carolina just for an opportunity to be robbed. Frustrated at how foolish and gullible she was, she started her car with the intention of confronting Madame Jord. The only problem with Abigail's plan was that her car was moved to a new location, and she had no idea where she was. She knew if she could find her way back to the main roads, she would be able to figure out where she was. She drove around, hoping to find someone to ask directions of, but the streets were desolate. The area also appeared to be more ravaged than she had last remembered. Did something happen while she was passed out, she wondered? After an hour or so of driving around, Abigail was able to pinpoint her location and hastily made her way back to the house where her wallet was stolen. Abigail pulled up to the house, but the house was not as she had left it. The house was burned to the ground, along with all the houses surrounding it on the neighborhood. Abigail punched the steering wheel again, confused by her recent bouts of aggression. She had never before been a violent person, nor someone who let things get to her, but she credited her recent uncharacteristic hostility to being knocked out and robbed. She deemed her actions temporarily reasonable. Further agitated, Abigail sped down the road to get far away from her humiliation. When Abigail reached the end of the road, she was faced with a decision in the form of an intersection. Her head began to throb. She gripped her forehead with her hands and leaned back into her car seat. Visions began appearing as if right in front of her, but she knew that was impossible because the only things in front of her were a stop sign, trees, and pavement. The reality that was before her was slowly fading away, and her new sight brought her soaring into the sky. The wind brushed by her face, and she could actually feel the brisk breeze. Abigail could think for herself, but was unable to control what she was looking at. Abigail watched as the ground below her became closer and closer. She must have been flying. Immense buildings lined the skyline as she dove in. She could hear the alarm and the commotion below. She was descending on a place that was very familiar to Abigail, and where she spent many weekend days strolling on the streets. She was descending on New York City. As she grew closer, Abigail noticed the tanks that lined the streets, most likely to protect themselves from any attacks if the Firebird got too close. It was at that moment that Abigail realized what she was seeing. She was seeing out of the eyes of the Firebird. She was having an out-of-body experience, sharing it with the one she aimed to stop. Abigail watched in horror as the massive wings flapped in front of her, releasing waves of flames with each motion. The streets became engulfed, and the tanks incinerated before getting a chance to fire. Abigail wished she could back out of the vision, but it was no use. She was powerless to its control. Abigail watched as her beloved Chrysler building, which she adored for its architecture, crumbled before her. She watched as hundreds of valiant soldiers protecting their country lost their lives effortlessly. She watched as nothing was able to hinder the onslaught. She realized the bird, born from the earth, was the greatest unstoppable force anyone had ever seen. Yet she was convinced that she would stop at nothing to try and stop it. Her eyes went dry, and Abigail closed them tightly to rehydrate, and upon opening them, she saw the familiar interior of her car. She was back in her own eyes. What did the woman do to her? Abigail thought. Perhaps she was not just a thief after my money. If that was the case, then Abigail was the one to stop the beast, or at least attempt to. How, Abigail thought, and why did it have to be her? Abigail took a series of deep breaths and tried to calm her mind so she could be safe for driving. As she inhaled and exhaled rhythmically, scenes flashed in front of her eyes once again. Flashes of building, flashes of a city skyline, and flashes of the Liberty Bell clued her in that the city before her was Philadelphia. The visions she was having now were different than those that preceded it. This time, she was not seeing out of the eyes of the bird, but getting glimpses of the city. Perhaps Philadelphia was the next target. The visions stopped as abruptly as they came, and Abigail felt a strong inclination to go to Philadelphia. She was uncertain if the beast was heading there, or what she would do if she was to confront the beast, but she could not fight the urges. Something was pulling her towards a city of brotherly love, something she could not understand. Chapter 14. Abigail continued to drive, making her way to Philadelphia, but running low on gas. She was hoping to find a working gas station, but all the ones she had passed were either closed or burnt down. Most of her surroundings, as she drove, were now barren ashes, void of any clue that life could have previously been maintained there. A truly depressing sight, and now Abigail was on the verge of being stranded in a powerless car, in the middle of the void. Abigail's car sputtered to a stop in the middle of the highway. Abigail did not see the need to pull over on the shoulder of the road, being that she had not seen any other car on the road since the parked cars in North Carolina. She got out of her car and looked in the back seat, seeing if there was any reserve gasoline or anything useful. She was wishing that she had her bike, so at least she'd not have to walk the rest of the journey. What is the point of walking? Abigail responded aloud to her own thought. By the time I get there, the city will be gone. Abigail popped the trunk and opened the hood in search of gasoline, but instead found a decent second-place prize. It was a collapsible bicycle. What is it doing in the trunk of an elderly woman's car? Abigail dared not question, but she was indeed grateful. Abigail spent a few minutes studying the bike and determining the proper way to unfold it so that it was in working order. She erected the bike, checked the tires, and jumped on. She felt energized and strong and started pedaling her way up the highway. She was in the middle of Maryland and knew she had a ways to go before reaching her Pennsylvania destination, but she did not lose hope. She rode on, ignoring her body's cry for thirst and ignoring the road signs as they passed by. She lost track of time in her focused ride, and before she knew it, she glanced a sign out of the corner of her eye that read, Philadelphia, 3 miles away. Abigail thought that her proximity to the city was impossible and pulled over to check the time. She raised her wrist to check the hour, but instead of seeing the time, all she saw was her naked arm. Apparently, her watch had been stolen along with her wallet. Damn gypsies, she thought. She looked onward and saw the skyline of Philadelphia in the horizon, billowing smoke like a chimney. She thought she might have been too late when the flaming head of her target poked its head into the sky. Abigail continued her travels, watching the bird dance around the sky with fighter planes. With graceful attacks, the planes were picked off one by one, and then the assault on the ground continued. Abigail entered the city and followed the sounds of gunshots and screaming. She quickly found herself among a battalion of soldiers, all covered in soot and blood. A familiar look. "What are you doing here? You need to get out of here, miss!" a soldier screamed as he ran up to Abigail. "I need to see it," Abigail expressed as she dismounted her bike. "This is not some show and tell. This is a serious threat. I cannot allow you to proceed any farther." Abigail hesitated a moment as she looked up at the gigantic fire beast that took sight of her. The bird gently landed, keeping its keen eyes on Abigail. With quick hops, it approached, sustaining fire from the soldiers' weapons the entire time. Mesmerized, Abigail slowly approached the orange and red glowing bird. The soldier who tried to stop her earlier allowed her to pass, as he too was in a trance. Abigail stopped only feet away from the bird, which bent its head down and unleashed a harsh, deafening squawk. Abigail wanted to cover her ears or cower in fear, but she did not. She remained calm. The bird leaned down closer, placing its face directly in front of Abigail. Abigail could feel the heat emanating from the flames jumping off its beak. The bird then opened its beak again, Abigail expecting to hear another screech, but instead it spoke in a soothing manner.
Who are you?
My name is Abigail Winthrop.
You were there at my rebirth. Why do you come back to me?
Before Abigail had a chance to answer, their conversation was interrupted. The bird quickly turned its head and spat a flaming ball of fire into the battalion. Their screams were short-lived as they incinerated and dissipated into the air. I am drawn to you. I want to understand you. I want to stop you.
Are you not afraid? You are mortal. I am a god.
You would have already destroyed me if I had anything to fear. You are just as intrigued by me as I am by you.
You do not understand. I have a mission, and it ultimately ends with your demise. Sparing you now, it's only prolonging the inevitable.
Then I thank you for my borrowed time. I assure you, I will use it justly. Is there anything I can say that will persuade you to stop the destruction?
Sadly, there is not. You, as a people, have brought this upon yourself. I am simply cleaning up the mess.
Then I must try to stop you in whatever way I can.
I implore you to try,
the bird said in a boastful tone. Abigail looked to the sky as a string of planes appeared above. She studied them from afar and recognized them to be bombers, which speckled out what looked to be little black dots mid-flight. They must have dropped bombs, Abigail thought in a panic. The birds stared up at the bombs falling their way, and then looked back at Abigail. The bombs were approaching fast, and moments before striking, the bird lunged at Abigail. Abigail closed her eyes at the sound of the explosion, and could feel her skin beginning to singe from the heat. Chapter 15. The bird climbed off of Abigail, who brushed off her smoldering clothes and checked herself for injuries. She was all right. She was alive. The city now lay silent, with the occasional interruption of the crackling of burning wood. Abigail looked up into the eyes of the fiery savior and addressed it. Why did you save me?
You are not done yet. If you wish to face me, then we engage. You are not to be taken out by the primitive act of bombardment. You are more important than that. Any life is more important than that.
You claim life is important, but what about all the sacrifices you demanded by that cult of researchers?
You are confused. I empowered the researchers as they chose to roost in my resting place. They, by no means, empowered me. My actions were never influenced by them, despite what they believed. The sacrifices they regularly performed were nothing more than senseless acts of ignorance originated by coincidence, and they fell into ritualistic practices, a scenario most humans fall victim to celebrating.
How long have you been in there?
Longer than I care to share, but I assure you, it has been long before the researchers stumbled upon me. To be honest, I rather enjoyed their company. They kept me entertained over the past 200 years. Prior to that, it was dreadfully lonely.
So what caused you to be born now, as opposed to 200 years ago?
It was time, and I was not born. I was reborn. I was dead inside of the earth, and when the earth died around me, I was born from its ashes. I am a phoenix.
A phoenix? Like from mythology?
All myths are based on reality, but not all reality is witnessed by the human experience. You were lucky enough to be graced with my presence, and I was lucky to be graced with yours.
Weren't you supposed to be born from the ashes of a fallen phoenix or something, not a mountain?
Allow me to explain. I am a guardian of the earth. I embodied it, and it hosts me. We are one in the same. We are an entity of life. I have been monitoring the progression of mankind and felt the pain of your actions. With each oil refinery, you pump life out of the earth and pollute its essence. With each nuclear power plant you generate, you quicken the death. With each forest you plane, you rip the limbs from the very life soil that once harvested an ecosystem. It is for this reason that I was reborn. The earth had officially been declared dead, and unlike other times before it, there was no chance for resuscitation. Now it is my time and my responsibility to cleanse the earth, to wipe it clean so that a newer and more respectful generation may strive.
But what about all the good that has come out? Surely there is something worth saving.
Nothing outweighs what has already been done. The corruption of the many outweigh the deeds of a few. No resuscitation.
Is there anything I can do?
You can die like everyone else.
The phoenix arched its back, looking as if to prepare itself for a strike. I refuse to let you claim my home, Abigail said as she took a defiant stance. I will stop you. The phoenix smiled, as much as a bird could smile, and winked at Abigail with an oversized eye. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. The phoenix pulled back its head, and upon jutting it forward, released a fireball from its mouth, the size of a car, directly at Abigail. Chapter 16. A fireball sped towards Abigail, who had a matter of seconds to react. Abigail rolled out of the way, and could feel the heat of the flames as they kissed the ground where she once stood. Apparently, the calm discussion had escalated into a battle. Abigail crouched, readied herself to evade another attack, and the phoenix jumped off into the air, using its ability of flight to its advantage. The phoenix circled overhead, Abigail keeping a close eye on it. The bird dove, and it unleashed a series of fireball attacks, none of which were aimed directly at Abigail. Knowing she was not in immediate danger, Abigail cautiously watched where the projectiles struck, wondering if perhaps the phoenix was trying to eliminate her possible escape routes. Abigail decided that her chances of survival were slim if she kept up with her current plan of standing in one spot, waiting for the bird to pick her off. So, Abigail decided to initiate a chase. Abigail ran through what were once glorious streets of a historic city, hopping debris and fallen buildings along the way. Although Abigail had always been physically active and an avid bike rider, she was surprised at her own stamina and agility at the moment. She felt fantastic, and she was moving with such speed and grace. Abigail glanced back quickly to see where her fiery stalker was, and to her surprise, it was swooping in silently right behind her. Abigail ducked to avoid getting impaled by its beak. In her abrupt motion, Abigail stumbled and began rolling into the charred remains of a truck. Abigail extended her arm out to block herself from striking the truck, and as she touched the vehicle, it propelled down the street. Confused at what she just saw and thinking that she may have caused the impact, Abigail decided to test if she could replicate the results. She ran over to a blackened car and gripped the location where the passenger side door once hung. Abigail tensed her shoulder and pulled back on the car with all her might. The car budged. Perhaps the mystic empowered her more than she had realized, Abigail thought. Then, that would mean that she may be capable of fighting the phoenix. She dragged the car a few feet and waited for the phoenix to close in on her. The bird acted as Abigail suspected. It honed in on her and prepared itself to dive. It grew closer, and Abigail stood her ground patiently. When the attacker was within spitting distance, Abigail spun around with the car in her hand and hurled it into the phoenix. The car flew from her fingertips and collided with the bird. The phoenix was knocked to the ground and landed in a fiery plume. The phoenix shook off the attack, enraged, and charged Abigail for a ground attack. Abigail turned back to her strategy of running, and a second chase ensued. Abigail marveled at her swiftness, easily navigating her way through the wreckage of the former Philadelphia. Abigail quickly breezed by a car and rapidly picked it up and heaved it over her head. The car struck the phoenix with exact precision, and the creature once again toppled to the ground. The bird let out a horrendous scream, intended to intimidate Abigail, but Abigail was too energized with her new abilities to let anything get to her. Abigail continued her sprint and knew that throwing blunt objects at the mighty beast would not destroy it. She needed a plan. What would extinguish it, Abigail contemplated, and came up with the idea of luring it into some sort of wind tunnel. Abigail continued her run, maintaining a speed just fast enough to keep the phoenix on her heels, but preventing it from reaching her. Every quarter of a mile or so, the bird would churn out a fireball, which Abigail was now able to dodge with ease. Abigail led the bird, which followed obediently, to the Market Street tunnel. Abigail ducked inside, hoping that there would be enough wind flowing through the tunnel to test her hypothesis. The wind was blowing strong, but had little effect on the phoenix as it flew in after Abigail. Abigail exited the tunnel, hoping to formulate a new plan of attack, but she must have lost a step as the phoenix was able to extend its beak and clamp down on Abigail's thigh. Her momentum, combined with the abrupt stop, jettisoned Abigail's whole body into a nearby brick building. Abigail struck the building, and it collapsed on top of her. Dazed by the collision, Abigail groggily began to push rubble off of herself. During the cleanup, the phoenix too clawed at the rubble atop of Abigail, trying to free her to continue the fight. Once skin became visible, the bird backed off and breathed fire into what was left of the building. Abigail cried out in pain as her shoulder seared before her. Rejuvenated by the pain, Abigail was able to break free from the remainder of the ruins and burst free with a leap into the air. Abigail landed as she set her sights on the lamppost near the brooding inferno. Abigail took a running start and lunged at the lamppost, gripping it to use it as leverage to swing about. She released herself from her acrobatic display and jutted herself, foot first, into the face of the phoenix. The bird's head jerked back from the kick, and Abigail sailed safely by, landing behind on her feet. Not allowing the bird any time to recuperate, Abigail returned to the lamppost and plucked it from the ground as easily as a child picks a dandelion. She spun the dim weapon above her, and it crashed down on the back of the bird. The glass bulb shattered on contact, sprinkling shards of glass across the street in an orchestra of delicate chatter. The phoenix let out a cry of pain, followed by a roar. The bird did not stay down long enough to avoid enduring more beatings, so it returned to the sky, where it would once again have the upper hand. Abigail nodded approvingly to herself at the thought that her efforts appeared to be working. She must continue before future injuries, which she knew she would obtain, would slow her stroll. Back to the attempt to extinguish the flames, Abigail thought perhaps dousing it with water would work. Where to find that much water in a city? A water tower would definitely work, but she would have to lead the phoenix out of the city until she was able to find one. Abigail luckily knew she could easily spot a tower from the distance, so she restarted her cat and mouse game. Abigail ran quick enough for the chase to be competitive without allowing any margin of error where the phoenix would be able to take another bite. The dash went on for miles. Abigail was hoping that her new energy would be able to endure until she could finish off her plan. She soon saw a water tower on the horizon and adjusted her headings accordingly. She made it to the tower, but was faced with a challenge: how to transfer the water from the tank to the phoenix. Abigail concluded that knocking the tank onto the phoenix would be the most effective method to try to snuff the fire beast, but was now faced with the challenge of enacting it. The phoenix snipped at Abigail as she danced around the legs of the tower, weaving in and out for safety. Abigail jumped up in a mighty bound and pulled one of the support bars from the structure. The metal pole, measuring about 10 feet in length, became Abigail's new weapon. Abigail needed to make sure that the bird was immobile for her to be capable of crushing it with the water tank, so she went on the offensive. Abigail dove at the creature, landing a forceful hit with her metal staff. Abigail was fortunate enough to have hit the wing of the bird, which, if done repeatedly, could strip the phoenix of its flight. Abigail unleashed a barrage of blows against the bird, which was unable to rally up enough speed to skirt the attacks as Abigail ran circles around it. Abigail then turned her attacks from its wings to its legs, bringing it from a vertical stance to a horizontal lay. The bird was beginning to become stationary. In order to keep up with the assault, Abigail needed to remain in striking distance, which, unfortunate for her, was resulting in painful burns across her hands and arms. She jumped in the air to deliver one final blow before attempting her crushing plan. She landed pole first, impaling the phoenix through the side. The pole drove into the ground, creating a temporary trap. A trap which would hopefully withstand the few minutes Abigail needed. Abigail released her weapon and ran towards the tower. She began scaling the metal legs. She climbed quickly, hearing the shrieks echoing from below. She stood atop the tower, peering down at the struggling phoenix. She had one shot. She bent at the knees and pushed on the side of the tank. She could hear the screeching of tearing metal, which meant it was working. She managed to push the tank over onto the well-calculated area that contained the phoenix. The tank plummeted on top of the fiery bird, splashing a sea of water over the field where it lay. Abigail watched from above as a wall of steam rose out of the dust. Hoping that was the end of the battle, Abigail descended to check on the vitality status of her opponent. A lifeless wing extended from under the metal remains. A wing that was once full of powerful flames was now just a dull wing of regular feathers. Abigail leaned in and pulled a large piece of metal from the pile. Looking in to find the bird's head, she uncovered an eye, which just stared as if stuck in a gaze. It remained motionless and dead. Abigail felt a wave of relief. She did not allow herself to be caught off guard and continued to uncover the phoenix to be absolutely certain it was finished. The fate of the world depended on her being thorough. She exposed the head and just stared at it. It was a magnificent beast, with majestic feathers and a regal aura. And too bad it had to come to this, she thought. As she was reflecting, the head snapped back to attention and unleashed a cry that startled Abigail. The bird opened its beak and unleashed a stream of fire that engulfed Abigail. Abigail fell to the ground, trying to put the flames out. She could feel her earrings melting to her ears. She could smell herself cooking. She had never imagined such pain. She was able to put herself out while the phoenix rose from the rubble and reignited. Abigail stood with all the energy she had left and prepared herself again in a defensive stance. As Abigail welcomed another attack, she could not help but notice the burning sensations in her fingers, like she was burning from the inside. She placed her hands in front of her face, and each of her fingers gave off an orange glow. She watched as flames protruded out of her fingers. Then, all at once, her fingers exploded before her. She fell to her knees and curled up in a ball as her whole body was consumed in an orange glow. Her skin split down her back, and a geyser of fire shot out of her body. Chapter 17. Abigail's mind was racing. She had no clue what was happening. Eventually, the pain subsided, but the flames erupting from her persisted. The phoenix watched in awe as the balled-up human sputtered flames from her being. Abigail stood slowly, withstanding the flames, and reached her arms towards the sky. Her skin peeled back as feathery wings protruded. The face Abigail had grown up with melted off, and a blazing beak snuck out. The human form that was once Abigail Winthrop was no more. Now, there was only a duplicate phoenix standing there before the original. Abigail looked over her new body, uncertain how to feel, but she was thankful that she retained her own mind. She was grateful for a second chance to stop the havoc, and she was not going to waste it. She ran awkwardly on her new legs and tackled the phoenix. The two rolled around the field in a scorching display. They each exchanged a series of beak-related wounds to one another. The phoenix broke free from Abigail's hold and took off into the air. Not knowing how to use her new wings, Abigail made various attempts of hopping into the air, flapping her wings, much like a child's futile attempts. She was unable to take off into the air, and the phoenix took full advantage, circling Abigail and pelting her with attack after attack of fireballs. Abigail could tell that she was weakened, and unless she was able to strike back, she was going to forfeit her second chance. Fueled by frustration, Abigail soared into the sky and glided about as graceful as an expert flyer. Overcome by the experience, she almost lost sight that she was engaged in battle until the phoenix dug its claws into her nape. It thrashed her about viciously, then released her neck, crashing her back to the earth. Abigail stood back on the ground and contemplated whether or not she was blessed with the ability to fire flames from her gullet like the phoenix. She arched her head back and hucked up a flaming ball that spewed forth into the sky, coming nowhere close to the phoenix. Although Abigail was now a powerful phoenix herself, she knew that with her amateur experience, she was still the underdog in the fight. She needed to level the playing field and fight with her strengths, intelligence, and cunning. Abigail turned away from the ferocious phoenix and began hopping away as if retreating. The phoenix was not going to allow her to withdraw from the brawl, and dove down to cut her off. As the phoenix neared, Abigail quickly turned about and rolled onto her feathered back. She extended her talons and clasped the underside of the phoenix as it flew by. With great force, Abigail was able to pull the bird to the ground, and she rolled herself on top of it. She stayed low, aiming to avoid the flaming attacks, and Abigail repeatedly sunk her beak into the body of the beast. The phoenix roared out in pain, and with a mighty strike, Abigail impaled the chest of the phoenix, piercing its heart. Abigail hesitated a moment with her beak embedded before she unleashed a ball of fire into the body of the phoenix. The phoenix shrieked in agony, and the bright flames that once proudly radiated from its entire body grew muted and meek. The phoenix laid its head back on the ground and stared up at Abigail. The two giant birds looked into each other's eyes, and with its final breath, the phoenix muttered, "Thank you," before disintegrating into ashes and blowing off into the wind. Chapter 18. Abigail stood in solitude in the lonely field outside of Philadelphia. She was hoping that the destruction of the phoenix would return her to her human form, but no such transformation transfigured. Abigail looked off into the distance, reflecting on her life and where it was headed, when a strong gust of wind carrying dust, ash, and leaves blew towards her. The air currents changed directions before her and morphed into a body, the body of Madame Jord.
Well done. I knew you were the one,
The mystic complimented.
What have you done to me?
Abigail inquired in a deep and concerned voice.
I graced you with the tools you needed to save the world you valiantly craved to protect.
And you stole my watch and wallet. Why?
A watch is no longer necessary where you're going. Time is irrelevant. A wallet contains items of Abigail Winthrop, a being that no longer exists. What you have become is much greater.
So I will not return to my life?
A disheartened Abigail asked.
Unfortunately for Abigail, no. She knew that there was going to be sacrifices. I made sure of that. I looked into her soul.
So what is to become of me?
You are to replace the former moderator of the Earth, the creature you just destroyed. You will nest inside the Earth and will monitor its progress as its growing entity until the time may come where you too will be required to cleanse it.
I will never wreak the havoc that monster created.
Trust me, after hundreds of years, feeling every hole bore into the earth and suffocating from the pollution, you will see the merit in starting fresh. The earth cannot fight back against the destruction, so you will fight in its place. You will grow to appreciate a new understanding of how the world works and how it has been abused.
Am I eternal?
My sweet protector, nothing of this world is eternal. When the time comes when you will be required to surface, there will be one out of all the billions who will be worthy. They will step up to challenge you, extinguish your life flame, and thus become you, and I assure you, and when that time comes, you will welcome it, like your predecessor did.
Abigail was speechless. Silently, she followed the mystic back to the mountain volcano in the heart of Pennsylvania, her new home. She climbed inside the protruding crater, and the mystic began sealing her in.
How will I know?
Abigail asked, as the mountain was fully closed.
Intuition. Everyone knows that the Earth is being destroyed, but only the privileged care to do anything about it.